Chapter 1. I'll never forget the first time I saw someone who'd been touched by one of the infamous extraterrestrials that had started visiting Earth about a week ago. It happened about 8:30 in the morning at my school, Pacific Valley Middle School, just outside San Diego. I had just come into my 7th grade homeroom with my best friend Dana Halversall, and sat in my usual seat next to her. However, as soon as I did, I couldn't help but notice her whole body stiffen, her mouth falling open wide enough to swallow an entire galaxy. She pointed a shaking finger toward the classroom windows. "Drake," she murmured. "Look!" "Woohoo! Yippee!" screamed a familiar voice from the windows, and I whipped my head toward them along with everyone else, including Miss Preston, who sat at her desk at the front of the room. What the? No way. None other than our classmate Chad Evans was literally flying up and down above the middle of the blacktop just outside the classroom. He dipped low enough to be level with the rims of the basketball hoops, then rocketed up so high I couldn't even see him through the top of the closest window, and he kept doing that over and over again. Even though he was soaring fast, I could tell it was him because of his typical dark gray jeans and all-black t-shirt. His enormous frame was hard to miss too, as he was by far the biggest bully in school. 12 years old like me, I'd seen him terrorize more than enough poor, defenseless kids in my time, and of all different ages at that, including older. Thankfully, though, he never bothered me. Probably because I was the star athlete of the school and pretty strong myself. Still, I always felt a bit guilty, like maybe I should have stepped in before he hurt or bullied any kids, even make him stop bullying completely. I definitely could have, but honestly, sometimes it was just easier to turn a blind eye to the awful things happening and go on living my life. The whole class let out a loud collective gasp at the sight of Chad, followed by random shouts like, "Oh my God," and "Is that Chad?" "That's right," he shouted so loudly it sounded as if he was using a megaphone, his voice echoing in our classroom. It probably did in every room of the school. "I've been touched by an alien! Touched! Look at me, I can do anything now!" And with that, he started doing horizontal loops around the whole blacktop, only 5 feet above the ground, angling between both basketball hoops as he did, over and over again, faster and faster until he was just a black blur. Yeesh. Didn't he get dizzy doing that? I guess not. Touched people never seemed to, despite all the incredibly crazy things they did sometimes. And I'd seen loads of people on TV do stuff like this by this point, but I'd never seen someone do it in person. Even though watching Chad was more scintillating than anything I'd ever seen in my entire life, I found my gaze sliding over to the whiteboard behind Miss Preston's desk. The 3 world-famous extraterrestrial rules the world leaders had come up with were displayed prominently on the top right corner of the board, in extra thick black ink. They appeared virtually everywhere since the aliens started randomly appearing. 1. Wear gloves, long sleeves, and pants at all times, including indoors. 2. If you see a small, pale, human-like creature, get away from it as quickly as possible. 3. Whatever you do, do not touch the creature. I shivered every time I gazed at the rules. It was just such a frightening, confusing time for all us humans. After all, more and more people around the world were claiming a creature with the same description as the one in the rules randomly appeared next to them, touched their bare skin with its own, and then totally disappeared, no matter where they were, inside or outside. And then, even more bizarrely, the touched people immediately possessed all kinds of amazing superpowers, like the ability to fly, turn invisible, and read other people's minds, among other things. But unfortunately, within the next hour or so, they either flat out lost those incredible powers, or 95% of the time, their heads exploded. Just thinking about it made my stomach freeze over, and the spinach and eggs I had for breakfast that morning threatened to slither back up my throat. I mean, seriously, what a way to go. To feel like and actually be on top of the world, to literally be able to do anything you could possibly want to, only to wind up dead an hour later, or if you were extremely lucky, suddenly lose all those miraculous abilities. Woohoo! Yippee! Chad shouted again, and I whipped my attention back to where he was still flying like crazy around the blacktop. I had to admit, I never thought I'd ever hear the likes of Chad Evans shout something like yippee, unless it had to do with belittling someone else, of course. Finally, Principal Belden and his noticeably younger secretary, Miss Caftel, stepped out of the school's side door. A middle-aged, strongly built man himself, Principal Belden came up to the edge of the blacktop, careful to stay just far enough away from Chad's continual looping, Miss Caftel following suit. She was nearly a third the size of Mr. Belden, with long, glossy black hair and wearing a tight-fitting light blue suit. Mr. Belden folded his meaty arms across his chest and froze his gaze on Chad. "That's enough, Mr. Evans. Stop these ridiculous antics and come straight to my office right this instant." But Chad kept going, round and round the basketball hoops, still a black blur. "Mr. Evans," Principal Belden said even more sternly, "that is quite enough. Do as I say right this very moment, or you will be forced to reap the consequences." But all he got in return was an especially loud, high-pitched laugh that seemed to echo in my very eardrums and sent a tingling sensation along my spine. Hoo boy, those were fightin' words, all right, especially to the likes of Chad Evans. "Forced to reap the consequences?" Chad asked as he kept whirling around the blacktop. "Forced to reap the consequences? Come on, Mr. Belden. Even you know that makes absolute bat-crud sense. I mean, I can do anything I want right now, and there's nothing you, or anyone else for that matter, can do about it. Why, I can fly around the whole world in 3 seconds flat. I can nuke an entire city at the mere snap of my fingers." He let out a loud chuckle. "Why, I can even make your head blow up if I really wanted to, Mr. Belden. And you know what?" He stopped flying and landed in the center of the blacktop, training an especially piercing gaze at Mr. Belden. He folded his own muscled arms across his chest, and I couldn't help but notice he was wearing short sleeves instead of long ones. Of course, breaking the rules wasn't exactly a new concept for him after all. "I think I do want to." Oh, crud, no. He couldn't possibly be serious. No way. Not even Chad Evans would do something as insanely atrocious as that if he could get away with it. Right? Of course, at the end of the day, it wasn't like he would get away with it. After all, even if he killed Mr. Belden, he was likely going to die himself within an hour tops anyway, although there was a chance he'd actually survive and just lose his powers. But then he'd be in serious trouble, like never get to see the light of day again for the rest of his pitiful life trouble. "You don't frighten me the tiniest bit, Mr. Evans." To Mr. Belden's credit, there was no quiver in his voice, his thick trunk of a body not wavering the slightest bit either. "The fact of the matter remains that you are still a troublesome young man who needs to grow up and reach your full potential like I and every faculty member of this school knows you can. But first, you require both careful and caring guidance from both us and your parents. So, to my office, young man, right now, chop, chop." He clapped his massive hands loudly and pointed toward the door he and Miss Caftel just came from. But Chad just tisked as he shook his head. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Belden. You see, with what's most likely only an hour left of my life, I have a lot of work to do. A lot. Starting with the execution of both you and the rest of Pacific Valley Middle School's faculty." A few loud gasps rang out in my classroom, my own throat constricting and growing as dry as an abandoned desert mine shaft, making it hard to breathe. He wouldn't. He couldn't. And if that was just the start of Chad's so-called work, then where did it go from there? And how did it end? To be totally honest, I really didn't want to know. For the first time, a sheen of sweat glistened on Mr. Belden's broad forehead, and he shifted his black-polished shoes ever so slightly. "Now, Mr. Evans, you know that's not the right way to go about—" Ooh, I think it absolutely is the right way to go about it, Mr. Belden. Geez, what a total jerk, mimicking Mr. Belden's terrified stutter. The real question is, should I start with you, or should I end with you? He put a finger to his chin as he tilted it up. What do you think? Mr. Belden opened his mouth with quivering lips, but Chad asked, Miss Caftel, what about you? Do you have a preference? She immediately jerked her posture fully upright, wringing her hands feverishly in front of her light blue suit. I was pretty sure she started fiddling with them as soon as she and Mr. Belden came out the side door. Chad waved a hand through the air. Oh, never mind. You were always completely worthless anyway. A crooked grin slid onto his face, and he nodded slowly. Come to think of it, I think I'll start with you then. We'll all get to see once and for all what you look like headless. He let out a light chuckle. At least something I've always wondered. Mrs. Caftel let out a loud gasp of her own, her hands kneading so feverishly now they were totally bone white. Everyone in my classroom, all the classrooms it seemed, was deathly quiet. Now, Mr. Evans, Mr. Belden said, but Chad said in a booming voice that overrode his and echoed throughout the entire school. Not now, Mr. Belden. I'm focusing. Chad closed his eyes, his forehead growing taut. Miss Caftel closed hers too, sweat bubbling along her cheeks, which were just as pale as her hands. Mr. Belden reached out and gripped her hand with his, and his eyes wide and bleary. He murmured something to her I couldn't make out. Chad's forehead grew even more taut, his slits for scrunched-shut eyes even narrower. I thought about squinting my own eyes shut, too. Any second now. Oh, God, it's going to happen any second now. Chapter 2. And then Chad's head exploded. Blood and chunks of brain splattered all along Miss Preston's classroom's windows, obscuring the principal, his secretary, and the rest of Chad's body from view. Shocked cries thundered through the room, weeping filling in the spaces between. Faint sobs and cries emanated from nearby classrooms, too. My body trembled like Miss Caftel's had just been. Even though a part of me was incredibly relieved she was still alive, I couldn't help but think, why? Why, you stupid, crazy aliens, why are you doing this to all of us? The most popular theories for the invasion spun through my head, as they always did when I heard another touched person bite the dust. One was how the aliens were just messing with us for fun. After all, they knew we were way less intelligent than them, so they decided to give some of us these amazing superpowers they'd concocted somehow, and then secretly watched us as we did all these stupid things until most of our heads blew up, all while doing the extraterrestrial equivalent of snorting with laughter, slapping each other high fives, or eating popcorn in some party room in their hidden spaceship, or back on their home planet. I wasn't sure what I thought of that theory, though. I mean, if the aliens were advanced enough to travel to Earth in the first place, would they really be amused by such silly, base forms of entertainment? Another popular theory was the aliens were just using the human race as guinea pigs of sorts. Like they created some kind of new drug or substance or something and figured they'd test it on us poor, much less evolved creatures. You know, before they felt safe using it on themselves. Kinda like how we test stuff on animals. I wasn't sure what I believed. I mean, there was just plain no definite answer. The only thing for sure was we weren't living on the same Earth we had been just a week ago. And something told me, deep down inside, we never would again. In any case, after what felt like an eternity of utter shock, horror, and even sadness over Chad's death, Principal Belden announced over the PA system that school was dismissed for the day. We were allowed to use our cell phones only to make transportation arrangements, so I immediately called Dad. Truth be told, I could have just walked the few blocks home, but I was feeling pretty emotionally shattered, like I'd been gutted like a pig, my body devoid of all its internal organs. I needed Mom or Dad to come and comfort me as soon as possible, and Mom was always on call as an ER nurse at the local hospital. I waited for Dad to swing by right outside the school along with a crowd of kids, Dana standing silently next to me. We must have looked pretty funny next to each other, what with me so big with my muscles poking out of my t-shirt even though I didn't work out, and Dana so small and practically half my height. The other thing we shared was a similar dark brown shade of hair. As I waited, I couldn't help but wonder if more people were going to be touched in our town and the surrounding ones now. Statistics showed that whenever someone got touched in one area, more were likely to follow right after that, as if the aliens were zeroing in on that particular place or something. Maybe they were, though so far no one had been able to predict the next place to be struck, or why. Finally, Dad swung by and picked me up in his trusty silver Chevy, his fairly overweight figure sitting in the driver's seat. He offered Dana a ride too, but she declined since her mom was on her way to pick her up. "I'm surprised you actually were able to find time in your busy schedule to come and pick me up," I couldn't help but grumble, despite the fact I was still pretty distraught over what just happened. He let out a long sigh as he pulled the Chevy away from the front of the school, fidgeting with his maroon tie on the suit he always wore to work. The only thing that really changed about him every day was his color tie. "Don't be like that, Drake. You know I'm always there for you in a pinch. It's just that, well." I know. There's just so much work to do, and it's just so important." Right. Well, yeah, it is important. Extremely important. Plus, it's just so exciting, Drake. Like, so insanely incredible exciting, you know?" I cringed as he briefly removed his gloved hands from the steering wheel as he drove and feverishly rubbed them together, like he was a deranged praying mantis or something. Yeesh. Well, I guess if he loved his job, he loved his job. And he did work for a prominent pharmaceutical company, so it probably was pretty important work. Heck, it must have been, because the last few years he'd been staying there later and later and missing more and more pockets of time over the weekends. Not that it really encroached too much on so-called family time, but he had missed a weekday dinner here and there as of late. "Anyway," he said, "what happened at school exactly? I take it someone got touched." I nodded, then quickly filled him in on what happened. I didn't exactly want to stretch out reliving that horrific moment. He shook his head, his facial expression sagging. "That is terrible news, son. Just tragic. Thank goodness Chad didn't actually go through with, well, you know." "Tell me about it." A short silence hung in the car. "I'll tell you what," he said. "Why don't we grab some pizza from Tino's for lunch, and for dinner, I'll whip you up your favorite burgers. Oh, and don't worry, I'll definitely be home for those tonight." Cheddar and mushroom with chipotle mayo and ketchup. Dad knew the way to my heart, all right. Straight through my stomach and out my, well, you know. Awesome. I was feeling better already, though I was pretty sure I'd never get the image of Chad's blood and chunks of brain splattered across Miss Preston's classroom windows out of my head. Probably not for as long as I lived, which, depending on what wound up happening with this horrendous alien invasion, hopefully wouldn't be too short. Still, unfortunately, the pleasant sensation didn't last very long. Well, it did through lunch and dinner, but after finishing that second mushroom and cheddar burger, I headed upstairs to my room only to realize I had a little room left in my stomach for some ice cream, which actually surprised me. Usually when I was throwing down a couple of Dad's mega-sized burgers, there was nothing left in the tank, but for some reason, there was this time. Or maybe I subconsciously needed the comfort of more food to get over the incredibly disturbing event that happened that morning. Either way, no sooner did I go to my room than I headed right back toward the kitchen. As I went, a mysterious light purple glow slanted through the hallway window, so I stopped and peered out. Yep, just like I thought, the moon was not only full tonight, but was at least 5 times as big as usual and a vivid light purple color. Beautiful, actually. Despite that, I shook my head. Ever since the aliens arrived and started touching people, strange phenomena like this had been happening all around the world all the time. Entire oceans had frozen over, mountains had grown twice or even more of their height, amongst other things. Thankfully, all that stuff returned to normal after a little while, but nobody knew for sure whether a touched person had done it or the aliens themselves. I shoved the disturbing thoughts away as I continued toward the carpeted staircase. As I started down, I happened to glance into the kitchen over the railing and completely froze, just like the Baltic Sea had recently. My stomach brewed a toxic waste that quickly spread throughout the rest of my body. No, it can't be true. Please, dear God, tell me it's not true. But I couldn't argue with what was right in front of me. The second person I'd seen in the flesh who'd been touched, and on the same day as the first, no less, because none other than my very own dad stood on the opposite side of the kitchen, sticking one of his bare hands straight in the middle of a roaring burner flame, the same burner he'd used to heat up the burgers not more than 15 minutes ago. Chapter 3. But that wasn't it. Aside from the utterly horrible, gut-wrenching fact that Dad was probably going to die real soon, I'd never forget the eerie smile on his face. It was sort of like an ecstatic yet knowing smile as he trained an unblinking, super-focused gaze down at his hand, which he slowly turned in the middle of the flame. Yeesh. The thing must have been on the freaking highest setting. All I could do was stare down at him. My dad, my own dad, now with only a 5% chance of living through the next hour. Oh dear God, how could something like this happen to me? To my family? It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair. A cold numbness replaced the toxic waste spreading throughout my body, because there was absolutely no doubt what I was witnessing. But before I could scream or say anything, he yanked his hand out of the flame and whipped his head up in my direction, his creepy smile totally gone. "Oh, hey there, honey," he said calmly, as if he hadn't just caught me witnessing the whole butt-crud crazy spectacle. Yikes. Yep, there was no doubt about it. He'd sensed my presence somehow. He'd known I was there before he even looked because of the incredible superpowers he'd just been given when he'd clearly just been touched by an extraterrestrial. I couldn't help but wonder when exactly, though. After all, ever since he'd gotten home from work an hour and a half ago, he hadn't cried out or rushed over to Mom or me claiming he'd been touched, or even that he'd seen a small, pale, human-like creature anywhere in the house. Then again, not everyone who was touched actually witnessed an alien, so it was possible one of the awful creatures did it without him even realizing it. But only one thing was for sure. He definitely knew he had been. And oddly and scarily enough, he hadn't told me or Mom. And, like Chad Evans and all the others who had been touched over the past few days, he appeared absolutely thrilled about it. "Getting some ice cream?" he asked. Even though it wasn't exactly a hard thing to guess given my all-consuming love for Rocky Road, the hair on the back of my neck prickled, then stood on end. I couldn't help but feel like he really knew that was exactly what I was doing, that he didn't even have to ask. Dad," I murmured. "You were just touched by one of those extraterrestrials, weren't you?" His bushy black eyebrows went all squiggly and he pursed his thick lips. "Huh? What were you talking about, honey?" "I saw it, you, holding your hand in the middle of that burner flame." I pointed at the burner as if it wasn't obvious enough. His whole plump body, still dressed in his typical work suit, jerked a bit. "Oh, right. I should probably turn this thing off." He twisted the burner switch and the roaring flame vanished, though the disturbing image of his hand in it still clouded my mind. "Sorry, I just wanted to feel the heat of the flame against my bare skin. I know it's kind of weird, but I just so darn sick of wearing these stupid gloves all the time, you know. But I definitely did not have my hand in the actual flame. I mean, that would be flat out insane and pretty darn painful to boot." He let out a wholehearted chuckle, one that reached the very bowels of his belly, but I wasn't buying it. "Dad, I literally just saw your hand in the middle of the flame. There's no denying it. which, now that I thought about it, was pretty weird to say because Dad never lied about anything. He was the most honest and upfront guy I knew, but I also knew what I saw. A burning sensation clawed its way up my throat, lighting it on fire. My own dad had actually been touched. Touched! And clearly he didn't even want to admit that to his own son. And clearly he didn't want to admit he probably only had so long left to live now, too. Maybe that last one was because he didn't want me to worry. Maybe he just wanted to wait and see if he was lucky enough to be part of the insanely small percent of people who survived. Oh God, this was terrible. So incredibly terrible and unfair. Why was this happening to me, my family, and even the whole world? Dad's eyes grew bleary as he gnawed a bit on his bottom lip. Drake, I told you. That's not what really happened. It must have just looked like that, especially from that far away. Right, like I was going to buy that. He took a long, deep breath and let out a weary sigh. This whole alien business, it's truly terrible, I know. It's messing with all of our minds, believe me. Every single person's in the entire world. But we'll get through it, okay? We all will. I let out a long sigh of my own, though inside I was still brewing up a toxic storm. Okay. There's a good boy. He smiled his warmest smile and left the kitchen, probably to join Mom in the living room, where she'd gone to read after dinner as usual. Unless their phone suddenly chimed with breaking news about the alien invasion, then it was straight to watching the news on TV. Same with me, too. Well, there was only one thing left to do. I took my cell phone out of my pocket and glanced at it. 6:47. I had to wait until 7:47, a whole hour from now, to know for sure if Dad would still be alive. What a totally miserable hour that was going to be. Then again, maybe he was right. Maybe I just thought I saw his hand in the burner. I mean, if he really only had a 5% chance of surviving the next hour, wouldn't you think he'd want to spend it with Mom and me? Perhaps even do something crazy he's always wanted to do? Especially since he'd have such amazing superpowers. I mean, he could basically do anything he wanted to in the entire universe. But clearly, he was off to the living room to read like usual. Unless he was in denial, of course. My heart rate spiked again, every muscle in my body clenching. Calm down, Drake. Just calm down. Wait out the full hour just to be sure. That's all you can do right now anyway. But I couldn't get the creepy image of his bare hand slowly twisting in the middle of the burner flame out of my head, along with that creepy, ecstatic yet knowing smile and laser-focused gaze on his hand. And I still couldn't as I dished a couple of scoops of Rocky Road ice cream into a bowl, brought it upstairs to my room, and vegged out on some random TV show I barely watched. Usually, I watched whatever the latest superhero show was and even caught up on an old one since I was absolutely obsessed with superheroes. All the posters of both my favorite superheroes and professional athletes lining my room's walls were proof of that. Same with a gigantic pile of sports and superhero games sitting next to my PlayStation. In fact, I always thought it would be incredibly cool if I grew up to not only be a famous professional athlete, but one so awesome some superhero company created a superhero based on me. Amazing, incredible athletic man, capable of taking on and even defeating the likes of Spider-Man, Superman, and the Hulk combined with nothing but his sheer natural athleticism. Okay, well, maybe not something that cheesy, but I trusted the company's judgment. In any case, I couldn't focus on the TV right then. I was too busy checking the time on my phone. The minutes seemed to slide by as slowly as a merry-go-round for toddlers. Just get there already. As I kept checking, I also couldn't help but think about the one time Dad almost passed away. My blood chilled at the memory. Just a couple of years ago, he'd contracted some kind of awful superbug and had been hospitalized for 5 days straight out cold. He was only awake a bit in the last day, but was so weak and out of it he could only communicate by writing on a clipboard. The first thing he wrote for Mom and me, though, was, "Don't worry, guys. I'm going to make it. This superbug ain't got nothing on me." Smiley face. He immediately fell back to sleep after that, but he stuck to his word and eventually got back to full health. Still, I'd never been more terrified in my entire life. The fact that I could have lost Dad forever, and now I was staring down the same horrible gun barrel. Finally, my phone gleamed 7:47, and I immediately headed back downstairs, quietly slunk out into the main hall, and peeked into the living room. My heart was beating so fast the whole way it threatened to burst through my ribcage and splatter blood all over the house. Thankfully, though, Mom and Dad were sitting on opposite ends of the plush green sofa, reading their own books. Looked like Mom was absorbed in one on history, Dad the latest in the pharmaceutical industry as usual. Oh, thank all the superheroes, real and fictional, in the entire universe. A huge inward sigh of relief wafted through me, and a deep peace settled over my soul. It must have been an optical illusion after all. He hadn't been touched, or at least he was one of the rare 5% who actually did survive and hadn't wanted to worry Mom and me that he might not. Then again, maybe he was right. Maybe this whole crazy alien thing was getting to my head. To everybody's. Either way, Dad was going to live, and he was going to live, and hopefully for a very long time. But before I slipped back to my room to watch some more pointless TV shows, I couldn't help but notice he wore that same eerie expression as before, that bizarre, ecstatic yet knowing one with that super focused, unblinking gaze on his book. Chapter 4. I couldn't sleep that night. It was impossible. Not that it was easy sleeping in general over the last week, of course, what with constantly being afraid an alien was going to randomly appear next to me while I was fast asleep and touch me. That was why, like most people, I'd started wearing a ski mask at night. Even the governor of California and the president of the United States constantly recommended on TV everyone do that. Of course, if the aliens were advanced enough to be able to randomly appear, give people some crazy superpowers just by touching their bare flesh, and then disappear, you'd think they'd be intelligent enough to simply slip their finger under people's masks or long-sleeve shirts while they slept to be sure they touched them. But still. As usual, I tried not to think such disturbing thoughts, but it was impossible not to. As I lay there in bed, Dad's words of wisdom slunk into my head. This whole alien business, it's truly terrible, I know, honey. It's messing with all of our minds, believe me. Every single person's in the entire world. But we'll get through it, okay? We all will. Still, I couldn't help but replay the eerie moment from earlier over and over again in my head. Dad's hand in the fire. His denial of the whole thing. That incredibly creepy expression on his face, not once, but twice. And the second time obviously happened after he lost his amazing superpowers. So, why would he have had such a weird, excited expression then? I couldn't think of a single reason, no matter how hard I racked my brain. Something was off with him. There was no doubt about it, and I didn't have a clue what. I was still lying awake when the clock on my nightstand gleamed 12 a.m., Then, at the exact same time, the light rumbling of the garage door sounded. What the? I pounced from my bed, dashed to the window, and peeked between the blinds. Dad's silver Chevy slowly pulled out of the garage. I could barely make out the dark outline of his plump figure in the driver's seat, and left the driveway. It quickly vanished around the corner down the street, leaving our peaceful suburban road lined with two-story houses totally dark and quiet again. What in the... Where in God's name was he going at this ridiculous hour? He never left the house at this time, or any time after he came home from work for that matter, no matter how late that was. Well, as far as I knew anyway, I usually wasn't lying awake this late either. I ripped my gaze from the window, plowed from my room, and loudly knocked on Mom and Dad's bedroom door at the opposite end of the hall. "Wait a minute," Mom's groggy voice called. A rapid padding of feet followed, then the door creaked open a crack, Mom peeking through wearing her pink pajama robe. "What is it, honey? Is everything okay?" She heaved a huge yawn. "Where'd Dad go?" She stopped yawning, her eyes stretching a little wide. "Oh, why, he's asleep, of course." No, that's impossible. He just left. I saw him pull out of the garage and drive down the street. Oh, well, that doesn't make any sense, honey. He wouldn't have had any reason to go anywhere at this ungodly hour. Right, exactly what I thought. Are you sure you didn't just see a neighbor's car? Or someone who made a wrong turn pulling out of the driveway? Mom, I told you, I literally just saw him pull out of our garage in his Chevy. I couldn't get a look at Mom and Dad's bed because Mom's figured completely blocked the door, plus the bedroom light was off. Honey, I'm sorry, but that's completely absurd. You must have just woken up, so your eyes were still blurry or playing tricks on you or something. Or maybe you were still partly dreaming. Now go back to sleep, dear. Nuh-uh, no way. I wasn't letting Mom fool me this time, not like Dad tried to do earlier. Mom, turn on the light, please. I want to see for myself. Honey, really, he's fast asleep. Why don't you get back to bed now yourself so you're all rested up for tomorrow? Mom, turn on the light now. I put my hands on my hips and gave her the biggest glare I could muster. Normally, I would never boss Mom or Dad around like this, but the moment seemed to call for it. Oh, all right. She heaved a deep sigh, rolled her eyes, and flicked the bedroom light on as she pulled the door wide open. Aha, see? I told you. I pointed at the bed. Dad's not there. She whipped her head around. Oh dear, you're right. How strange. Yeah, I'd say, though there was something wooden about how she said that, like it was fake or something. Seriously, what was going on today? Between Chad, Dad, and now Mom, this was shaping up to be one of the craziest days of my life. She whipped her head back round, her eyes lit up. I know. He must have fallen asleep in the living room, reading a book or something. He does that all the time. Really? Not that I knew of, but I was usually asleep way before midnight. Come on, let's go downstairs and check. But there was a slight tremor in her voice, as if she was more nervous about what we might find there, or not find. But first, let me grab my slippers. My feet are absolutely freezing. She vanished back into the bedroom, though it took what felt like a full minute or two for her to find them. Sorry, she said when she came back, her fuzzy pink slippers to match her robe on her feet. Forgot where I put them. I'm not in the habit of going on midnight adventures, you know. She smiled weakly, another weird thing, and I followed her as she quickly headed down the hall, down the carpeted stairs, and out to the corridor past the kitchen. As soon as we went into the corridor, though, it was clear light was emanating from the living room. Huh? What in the... Once we rounded the corner into the room, sure enough, there was Dad, slouched on the green sofa, fast asleep, a thick pharmaceutical book on his lap. Chapter 5. What? How? How was that possible? Drool dripped from the corner of Dad's mouth, pooling in a little puddle from his maroon tie. Honey, Mom snapped. Honey, wake up! She lightly shook one of his broad shoulders, and his eyes popped open. He said. Oh, hello, honey. His gaze fell on me. And hello, honey, he let out a light chuckle. That's a lot of honey right there. Sleepiness always made Dad a bit goofy, as if he wasn't already a little too goofy anyway. Time for bed, sweetie, Mom said. He straightened both his posture and tie, then slowly pulled himself to his feet. Right. I guess I dozed off there for a little while, eh? More than a little while, Mom said, a bit of an edge to her voice, an edge that seemed to carry an extra meaning I couldn't quite put a finger on. Really, for the third time tonight, what was going on around here? Nothing was making any sense. Right, honey. Dad smiled what appeared to be sheepishly back at Mom. Well, thanks for coming down and getting me, guys. Definitely a lot more comfortable sleeping in bed than down here. Drake, you ought to hit the sack yourself. Don't want to be tired at school tomorrow. And definitely not for your big basketball game against Spring Mesa tomorrow night. Your team's gonna need you, that's for sure. He let out a light chuckle as he fiddled with his tie. Weird. I nodded, still not able to form words, since I still wasn't believing what I was seeing. I mean, I saw Dad leave our property in his Chevy. I saw him. He couldn't be in the living room right here, right now. Without another word, we all went back upstairs to our own rooms, silent the whole way. But I still couldn't fall asleep. I just lay on my bed, taking long, deep breaths, the whole house deathly quiet again. Now I was sure something was off. Horribly, horribly off. The way Dad seemed to leave the house but somehow reappear to sleep in the living room, as if by magic. How Mom seemed worried and both of them were a bit nervous. Even how long she took to put on her slippers had been a little strange. I mean, how can it take that long to find them in a room with just a closet and a bathroom off it? And Mom and Dad were super neat people, so it wasn't like there were loads of clutter to search through. Before I knew it, I was at my bedroom door again. Slowly and quietly, I opened it so it didn't make a creak, then carefully crept downstairs and headed toward the garage. The whole house pitch dark. Good thing I knew it by heart. Eventually I passed the living room again, and as I did, a small gust of cool air hit me. I stopped. That was odd. I peeked into the living room. The window was wide open, the curtain billowing in a light breeze. I hadn't noticed that earlier. Probably had been so shocked to see Dad actually slouched there asleep on the sofa. Still, Mom and Dad never left any windows open. In fact, they never opened any at all, which could only mean one thing. I crept the rest of the way to the garage door and slowly opened it so as to not make a single sound. Now it felt as though a giant blast of freezing air gusted through my whole body, making me shiver nonstop. As I expected, Dad's car wasn't there. Just like when I'd witnessed him rotating his hand in the middle of the burner flame, I hadn't been seeing things. What I had witnessed had actually happened. It was real, which meant something was horribly, horribly off here. Chapter 6. I just stood there, staring into the dim garage at the empty space where Dad's silver Chevy should have been. Yep, no doubt about it, he'd really driven off at the crack of midnight, and to where exactly was anyone's guess. But wherever he'd gone, he'd obviously come back super fast. Either ran or even flew using his new touched superpowers, slipped back inside through the living room window, and faked sleeping on the sofa, all before Mom and I could get to him. Which meant he somehow knew I'd seen him leave and raced to get back here in time to try to fool me. But how? And how could he still have his superpowers in the first place? It had been way past the hour touched people always had them for. I couldn't answer that last question, but then I remembered how long Mom took to get her slippers. Had she communicated with him somehow? I hadn't heard her talk on a phone at least, but she'd been acting pretty strangely herself tonight. Aw man, this was by far the weirdest and creepiest night of my life. Seriously, I had to figure out what was going on here. Wait a minute, what if Mom and Dad were right behind? I instinctively jerked my head back around and gazed down the main hall. But no, neither Dad's chubby figure nor Mom's much shorter and much more slender one were standing anywhere along the shadowy corridor like I thought they might have been. I guess they didn't know I was down here. But for how long? I quickly and quietly slunk back into my room and lay in bed again, but I still couldn't fall asleep. I mean, how in the flaming gates effect could I? Finally, a whole hour later, exhaustion settled over me, and I started closing my eyes, only for something small and white to appear out of thin air right next to me. I popped my eyes fully open again. Holy crud. Oh dear God, no. Chapter 7. I gazed at what looked like a puny man with glowing, somewhat even pulsating white skin standing only a couple inches away from me on my bed. Although I didn't feel an extra sag in the mattress from the added weight, the strange creature had gaping holes for eyes, nose, and mouth and appeared to be smiling, a sort of ecstatic, knowing smile, just like the one Dad kept wearing earlier that night. Holy mother of bat crud, are you freaking kidding me? I instinctively tried to jerk away, but I couldn't move. My whole body one large Drake-sized block of ice. I'm paralyzed. Oh dear God, I'm totally paralyzed. And if it wasn't only from intense fear and confusion, it was also from some kind of ability, some superpower this horrible creature exuded. I could just feel it. What was clearly one of those crazy little pale aliens that had been visiting our planet for the past week had complete and utter control over me, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. The little man then reached out a long, slender finger toward my face from a hand that had only 3 fingers. The other 2 were curled. The fingers slowly slipped under my ski mask. I tried to scream stop, but my lips wouldn't even budge a millimeter. Oh dear God, this is it. But before I could full-on panic, the gentle yet firm words, "It's okay," whispered inside my mind, clearly emanating from the creature. But the words did little to calm me. No, they did quite the opposite, actually. "It's okay, Drake. This is supposed to happen. It's meant to be. I know everything about you, Drake. I know you, and I love you with every fiber of my being. And I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Drake, but this must happen. It's for the best. For you, me, and everyone in the entire universe. I hope you can find it in yourself to forgive me, to forgive my whole species, even though you only have less than an hour left to live now. Goodbye, Drake. Goodbye forever." And then the finger touched my bare cheek. Chapter 8. "No!" I screamed, jerking awake. I feverishly whipped my head around. I was in my room, alone, my covers crumpled beside me where I'd just flung them. The early morning sun slanted through my partly open blinds, lending the room a nice light orange glow, which in turn gave me a wholesome, healthy feeling. Oh, thank all the gods of the universe. It had only been a dream. Just a horrible nightmare. Right? I definitely didn't feel any different. Not like I now had any crazy superpowers anyway. Nor did I feel insanely excited, like most people had been touched seemed to. Still, there is only one way to find out for sure. I tried as hard as I could to make my body float above my bed. I commanded it to with my mind with every last bit of strength I had, but my body wouldn't budge. Not a single inch. Then I tried to command my clock, which read 6:55 a.m., 5 minutes before the alarm went off, on my nightstand to float, but it wouldn't either. Nope. I couldn't do anything supernatural. Not a single thing. Awesome. That meant it really had been just a dream. Then a low rumble reached my ears, and I almost jolted off the side of my bed. The garage door opening. Again. I leapt to my feet, raced to the blinds, and peeked out. Sure enough, Dad's Chevy rolled down the driveway and into the garage, the low rumble sounding again as the door closed. So he'd gone back out last night after Mom and I woke him up in the living room, and now he was back with his car, which meant he'd probably been out all night long. But where, and doing what? Heck if I knew, but if I did know one thing, I was going to find out. Without him or Mom knowing, of course. They couldn't be trusted after all. Clearly they didn't want me to know about any of this, and would do anything they could to stop me from figuring it out. I waited the last few minutes for the alarm to go off, then got ready for school like normal, eventually ambling down to the kitchen, faking a yawn and general grogginess. I was typically not a morning person anyway, but all the bizarre stuff going on lately had me feeling like I'd just drunk my entire body mass in energy drinks. But I couldn't let that on to Mom and Dad. As expected, they were both in the kitchen, Mom brewing coffee at the stove while Dad sat in his typical work suit at the table. This morning he wore a dark navy tie, so he must have changed from the maroon one last night. "Good morning, Drake." He slid an especially large spoonful of Fruit Loops into his mouth. For such a serious businessman and man in general, he sure loved his kiddish cereal. Yep, he definitely appeared to be the same old Dad I always knew and loved. But I couldn't help but notice how vibrant and full of life he seemed. Well, normally he was like that in the morning, but for someone who appeared to have been out all night, doing God knew what, he didn't look the tiniest bit tired. "Morning, Dad." I sat down and poured myself some Fruit Loops and milk in the bowl Mom had laid out for me. Apparently, the love of Fruit Loops permeated the family genetics. Have a good night's sleep? That creepy, knowing smile, minus the ecstatic part, slithered across Dad's face. I couldn't stop a light shudder. Yeah, I sure did. Great, now you've done it, Drake. Now you've tipped Dad off with your stupid nervous tics. As though on cue, the eerie smile slid off his face. Really? Be convincing, Drake. Be convincing. Yeah, definitely slept like a rock, actually. Much better. But as I raised my own spoonful of cereal to my mouth, Dad continued to gaze hard at me, the corner of his mouth curling downward. Then he squinted slightly, and it felt like something actually penetrated my brain. Something super thin and sharp and invisible. It wasn't painful at all, but it definitely pried a bit, trying to ease its way inside, and it definitely came from Dad. I didn't have a clue how I knew exactly. I just did. I instinctively fought back, though, and tried to mentally shove whatever the heck it was out of my brain, and thankfully it popped right out, although I had no idea if that was because of my effort or because Dad removed it. That's good, son, he said over another spoonful of cereal, his expression normal again. Freaky. What in the flaming gates of heck had that been about? Whatever it wasn't right, wasn't natural. Suddenly I didn't want to be there anymore. I wanted to be out of the kitchen, out of the house, literally anywhere else. I climbed to my feet and started putting on my backpack. Well, I guess I should get going. But you haven't finished your cereal yet, honey, Mom said as she poured freshly brewed coffee into a mug at the counter, a cloud of steam rising from it. I'm not all that hungry. Really? Dad asked. Since when are you not hungry for breakfast, or any meal for that matter? I barely managed to smile. Those double mushroom cheeseburgers last night really did a number on me. And that rocky road. I forced a weak chuckle. Is that right? Dad asked, though I could sense the disbelief and the slight edge in his voice. Yeah, Mom said with a smile. Those were pretty gigantic. Yep, well, see you later. I spun around. But you're going to miss the great news, Dad said. But I hightailed it out of there before I could hear anything more. Huh, great news? I thought as I fast-walked along the front lawn to the street, not even bothering to look back. What great news could there possibly be these days? I gunned it all the way to the school, which was only a few blocks away, and stood by the table in the cafeteria Dana and I usually sat at. I literally vibrated in place. Come on, Dana, get here. Get here now. I need to talk to you. As I waited, the irony of that thought hit me. Sure, Dana and I had been friends for quite a few years now, but at first we were huge rivals. I still remember how she arrived at our school toward the end of second grade and challenged me in every single sport we played. Don't get me wrong, at the end of the day I always edged her out, but despite her short and small physique, she was ferociously athletic, and even though I respected that, I also felt threatened at the same time. It wasn't until she started wearing her classic Wonder Woman sweatshirt during the cooler months and I happened to glimpse her Green Lantern lunchbox in the cafeteria one time that we hit it off. I mean, how could I not be friends with someone who loved superheroes as much as I did? Finally, she arrived at our cafeteria table, and everything that happened last night and this morning came gushing out of me. She stayed silent the whole time, her face growing paler and paler, her mouth seeming to drop more and more open. Heh. She was incredibly surprised and horrified. She actually looked kinda cute. What the? Where did that come from? Focus, Drake, focus. By the time I finished, we were both sitting at the table and the cafeteria was packed with kids. The low buzz of conversation filling the room. I didn't even remember sitting down. Whoa, she murmured. First Chad, now your dad? Normally when one of us rhymed by accident, we burst out laughing. But now it was clearly not one of those times. She fixed her sharp hazel gaze on mine, the 2 freckles on her nose looking extra pronounced. You have to do it. Do what? Follow him, tonight. If he leaves your house again, you have to see what he's up to. I mean, it's gotta be something, right? And something big, too, since he's been acting so strangely lately. Heck, maybe it's the aliens who are really up to something. You know, through him in a way. Because they're obviously the ones who touched him in the first place. I let that rattle around in my brain, even though it was something that had admittedly already occurred to me over the past 8 hours or so. But it was so creepy I hadn't wanted to let myself think about it too much. Still, she definitely had a point. Then it hit me. "Do you think they're lying?" I asked. "Who?" I sucked in a quick breath, goose flesh rippling along my arms under my long-sleeve shirt. "Other people who have been touched. The ones whose head didn't explode but claimed their superpowers disappeared an hour later. Do you think they lied for some reason and are now up to weird stuff with their superpowers nobody has any idea about? Like my dad, maybe?" "Well, aside from maybe my mom, since she seemed to know something about what Dad was doing, but still." Dana's eyes blared wide again and then shrank back to normal. "Maybe? But didn't you say your dad denied being touched in the first place?" "Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. That doesn't explain why all the other people who were touched but lost their powers never denied being touched in the first place." "Exactly." "Yeah, good point. In fact, as soon as people got touched, they usually immediately told other people or just plain started doing crazy supernatural stuff, sometimes even in public or on TV. Which only begged the question, so why my dad then? Why did he deny being touched and didn't die or lose his powers? Not that I was even remotely complaining about him still being alive, of course. I was still thanking all the lucky stars in the universe for that. And why was he out all last night, too?" Dana shrugged, her facial features tightening. "That's what we've got to find out." "We?" "Oh, you know I'm coming along. There's absolutely no way I'm not. No matter what you say." She smiled as she reached out and placed her gloved hand on my arm. Even though our bare skin wasn't touching, a tingling sensation bolted along it. She yanked her hand away, blinking rapidly as she licked her lips. "Sorry, I didn't mean to, you know." "Oh, that's all right." I leaned back in my seat. Did I have to make the already awkward situation even more awkward? Still, it wasn't like it was my fault. She'd been doing that more and more lately, randomly touching my arm or grabbing my hand. It was weird because we'd been friends for so long, but she'd never done that type of stuff before. We were getting older, though, I guessed, becoming more confident and comfortable with ourselves and each other. It was kind of nice, actually. "Well," she said, "no matter what's going on with your dad, I really hope he's going to be all right. At least the number of people who have been touched has gone down a ton the last 24 hours. "Huh? Really?" "Yup, most of the people in the world are actually abiding by the 3 extraterrestrial rules. A lot less people are being touched. And there are even fewer alien sightings all around the world." "Whoa, I didn't know that." I still didn't get why so many people didn't immediately start following the rules, though. Apparently lots of them didn't think such simple things as wearing pants and long sleeves and whatnot would really stop an advanced alien species invasion. I guessed I couldn't blame them there. But then there were others who simply didn't like being told what to do, and some who didn't think the aliens were really all that big a threat in the first place. That more and more people were dying must have made a lot of people finally start to take the rules seriously. Now that I thought about it, that must have been the great news Dad had been alluding to this morning. "That's awesome," I said. "Maybe it means the aliens are losing interest in us humans or something and will finally stop touching us altogether." "True," Dana said. "Or maybe those 3 extraterrestrial rules are actually working." "Yeah." But then Dad and all the lying and weird stuff he'd been doing lately popped back into my head, and a cold, slithery feeling slid along my spine. Before I could think too much about that, a familiar voice shouted in the cafeteria, echoing throughout it. "Alien! Alien! Watch out, everyone! It's a freaking extraterrestrial!" Chapter 9. I whipped my head toward the voice, which came from the towering, thickly built Boris Yanley, one of Chad Evans's feared underlings. Well, before Chad tragically died, of course. Now that he was gone, though, Boris was probably the lead bully of the school, a title he cherished knowing him. And there he was, standing in the middle of the cafeteria, pointing at Wilbur O'Connor, an overweight kid who always sat alone in the corner of the room. Poor Wilbur. I was pretty sure he didn't have a single friend, and probably never had. Wilbur looked back at Boris with eyes the size of Jupiter, his eyebrows forming a squiggly line across his forehead as he adjusted his thick-framed glasses. And then a small, pale, tiny man smacked against his plump side, causing him to scream in a high-pitched voice as he leaped from the table, farting loudly as he did. His glasses clattering across the floor next to the creature, which lay limp now, obviously some kind of fake, stuffed object fashioned to look like one of the infamous extraterrestrials. It was pretty shoddily made, though, so it was probably constructed by Boris or Chad's other feared underling, George Kraft. Or maybe you could actually buy such things online now, for all I knew. I glanced in the direction of the object that had come from, and, sure enough, George Kraft stood a few yards away from Wilbur. The despicable bully immediately hunched over and burst out laughing like a hyena, which was kind of ironic because he sort of looked like one with his short, wiry, though tough-looking body. And then everyone else did too, their laughter filling the whole cafeteria, making it feel even more congested. A few kids plugged their noses and waved their hands through the air as though dispelling Wilbur's accidental leak. And then I lost it. Totally and completely lost it. I leaped to my own feet, pointed at Boris, and yelled, "Hey, knock it off, man! Who the bat crud do you think you are picking on this poor kid? He didn't do a single thing to you, or anyone for that matter. Seriously, what the heck is wrong with you two?" I shot George a glare as well, and he shrank back a bit. Good. We all need to band together right now, guys, all of us. I mean, we lost Chad yesterday, and we could have lost a whole lot more, and any one of us could be next. So no more randomly starting fights and picking on each other for absolutely no reason from now on. Got it? Total silence filled the room. I tried to keep my posture as rigid as possible, my hands firmly clenched into fists at my sides. Wilbur, his wide face a light pink shade, slowly bent over, picked up his glasses, and then put them back on. Boris held up both his hands, which surprisingly actually had gloves on them. Guess now that Chad was gone, he didn't have at least a little common sense. Okay, you're the boss, MVP. MVP. That was my nickname I'd heard drift around school the past couple years. Not sure who came up with it, but it was definitely meant in a good way. "No more shenanigans," Boris said. "For now, anyway. We promise. Isn't that right, GK?" He glanced at his fellow slimeball with a lingering smile. I wasn't so sure I liked the looks of it. George nodded, and the tendons on his neck standing out, and a few beads of sweat dotting his forehead. And then the two of them slunk out of the cafeteria doors like a couple of defeated animals. The light buzz of conversation filled the cafeteria again, immediately followed by the bell announcing 2 minutes until homeroom. As Dana and I headed to Miss Preston's class among the flood of kids, she said, "Well, that was awesome." Gee, thanks. I honestly really didn't know what to make of what just happened. I was just so sick and tired of Chad and his cronies being such total jerks all the time, and to such nice, innocent kids no less, especially during such a terrifying time for everyone. It just had to stop. "You know," Dana said, "you have a lot of power in this school. You could, and, well, I guess I'm saying I think you should, use it more often. You know, for the greater good and all, like you just did." Those words rang through my brain like a bell, ricocheting from side to side. A lot of power. The greater good. Maybe she had a point. Maybe I should do that more often. You know what? I think you're absolutely right, and I think I will from now on. She giggled as she wrapped both her arms around one of mine. "Of course I'm right, MVP. I always am." The giggle immediately cut off as she removed her arms. Oh, oops. But she didn't apologize this time. Chapter 10. Thankfully, the game against Spring Mesa that afternoon turned out to be incredibly therapeutic. Spring Mesa was my school's biggest rival, and the game was a nail-biter all the way through, my favorite kind. My school gymnasium was a giant, constantly pulsing mass of energy the entire time, and everyone was there, including both schools' students, faculty, and probably all the players' parents, too. Sure, it was weird all the players had to wear gloves and long sleeves and pants the whole game, the second time this season, but it was great to get my mind off all the horrible recent alien stuff. Anyway, we were in a timeout with only 1.5 seconds left in the fourth quarter. The score, Spring Mesa 60, Pacific Valley 58, our ball. That's right, we were going to need a 2-pointer to tie and to bring it to overtime or a 3 to win the game. I'd been extra hot that night too, scoring 47 of our points, and most of them had been 3-pointers. For me, it was a no-brainer. We go for the 3, I said in the huddle. Top of the arc. I glanced at John Wall. You and Gunther set the screens. They both nodded, as did Coach Russell, who was used to always deferring to whatever I said for the past 2 years. It just about always worked after all. "You heard, MVP," he barked, which always sounded weird on such a shrimpy man with a graying scruff of beard on his chin. "The 2-screen top of the arc play." It was one we'd done a lot, so everybody knew what to do. The horn sounded and everyone took their positions, me in the far right corner of the court. The referee blew the whistle and handed Dan Sanchez the ball on the sideline. I immediately faked dashing along the baseline and instead double-backed around the top of the arc, working my way around the 2 screens as planned. When I made it to the top of the arc, Sanchez threw me the ball, a perfect pass. He was good at passing the ball in, though not much else, to be honest. Still, that was all we needed. I caught the ball and turned toward the basket. Yes. Not a single defensive player in sight thanks to the 2 screens. The super tall, gangly Spring Mesa guy, their star player, was desperately racing toward me, coming from the key, but there was no way he'd get there in time. No way he'd be able to block my shot despite how tall and athletic he was. I couldn't help but let a smug grin cradle my face as I took my usual jump shot, though this time it felt like it was in super slow motion, like it was absolutely perfect in every way, and I was already admiring my own shot. Maybe I was, subconsciously. The ball sailed toward the basket, just grazing the top of the gangly kid's outstretched fingers, and the buzzer going off as it did. Swish. Nothing but net, nothing but victory. And what a sweet one it was. The home crowd went ballistic, and before my teammates could sweep me up and hoist me into the air like they usually did when I hit a game-winning shot, I glanced toward Dana's usual spot in the second row of the bleachers. She was on her feet, her face bright red as she cheered and wildly waved her arms, though I couldn't hear her through the din. The gesture made even more warmth swell through my already toasty body. It was so awesome she came to every single one of my games, no matter which sport, and for the past couple years at that. Then I glanced toward Mom and Dad's usual spot in the top right corner of the bleachers. They preferred more of an aerial view, and it was the first time I'd looked their way all game. But suddenly, it felt like all the heat had been sucked from my body, the thunderous noise in the gymnasium replaced by a total vacuum, because only Mom sat in her usual spot, an empty one beside her where Dad typically did. No Dad. No Dad at all. For the first time since I could remember, during any of my sporting events, and I played a ton of sports leagues over the 12 years of my life, Dad wasn't there. He hadn't come to what was by far the biggest game of the season, maybe even the biggest game of the whole year, and he hadn't watched me make the game-winning shot. Chapter 11. Your father. Mom and I sat in her beat-up red Camry. She'd never gotten a new car, I guess she loved that old thing, in the school parking lot after the game. After the tidal wave of fans swept me outside, I'd waited by her car, totally numb inside and out. I just couldn't believe Dad hadn't shown up for my game, no matter how hard I tried. It just didn't make any sense. When Mom arrived, we got inside and just sort of sat there, staring straight ahead of the windshield as everyone else left the lot. Mom's face was as pale as one of those extraterrestrials' bodies, her eyes as vacant as the school property now, which was lit by a few sporadic pole lights since the sun had set. Then her gaze took on a glassy sheen. Your father, he couldn't make it. All I could do was nod, my insides all mixed up like a giant container of millions of puzzle pieces. A horrible emptiness drifted through me, settling deep inside me. Yeah, no crud, Mom. He had... Let me guess, I said. He had some work he had to do, because it's just oh so important, and it's just oh so amazingly exciting, like so amazingly incredibly exciting. I feverishly rubbed my gloved hands together like he had yesterday when he picked me up from school after Chad's tragic death. Now it was Mom's turn to nod, her eyes growing glassier by the second. He would have liked to have been here, honey, but well, then why wasn't he, Mom? This stupid job is taking over his life. It's taking over all our lives. He's never missed a game of mine before, not a single one, ever. Heck, he used to not even miss a single dinner up until a year or so ago. I know. Mom plastered both her trembling hands to her face. I know, honey. Mom, what's going on with Dad? What's his deal? I mean, it's not just with the past couple years, but... I wanted to say the last 24 hours, too, but just barely held back. I didn't want her thinking I was still on to how weird she and Dad had been acting lately. Dana and I planned on secretly figuring out what was going on. I don't know. It's just that he's clearly not the same person he used to be. Mom removed her hands from her face, tears smeared all over it and smudging her makeup. I know, honey. You're right. You're absolutely right, and I agree. It's terrible. Your father's job, it's been extremely demanding lately. It's becoming more and more demanding. But we need the income, Drake. Our family can't get by on just my nurse's wages alone, and your father makes very good money. I've been hoping for a while now that his work will finally calm down and things will get back to normal, but we both have. But, well, it's still an all-time high, unfortunately. She reached out and gripped my gloved hands with hers. But like I said, hopefully things will start to settle down real soon. And I know he wishes he could have been here to watch you play tonight, Drake. I know that for a fact, and I know you do too. He loves you, honey. He loves you very, very much. We both do. She lightly squeezed my hand, and I returned the gesture. I know, I said. I love you guys too. We both let that sit for a bit, then Mom said, Let's head back home and have some dinner. I honestly have no idea if your father will show up for that. There's no reason we can't enjoy some mushroom and cheddar burgers ourselves, eh? She cracked a flimsy smile, and I did my best to return it. She always under or overcooked the burgers, but it was a nice enough gesture. Okay, sounds like a plan. And we left the lot. Turned out Dad actually did make it home for dinner, and he whipped up a batch of mushroom cheeseburgers absolutely perfectly and in record time as usual. Sorry about missing your game, kiddo, he said as he flipped one in the pan over the burner. As he did, I couldn't stop the image of him slowly twirling his bare hand in the middle of the flame with that eerie expression on his face from popping into my head. I barely held back a shudder at the thought from where I stood near him at the kitchen counter. As I'm sure your mother told you, I just couldn't miss work. It's been really intense over there recently. As if on cue, that super creepy expression slid onto his face yet again, and my stomach lurched, a little nausea invading it too. But just as quickly as the expression appeared, it vanished. Seriously, what was going on with him? Dana and I absolutely had to find out, tonight. Don't forget, real exciting too, I mumbled. Dad chuckled. That's true. It is extremely exciting, and I'd much rather watch you play basketball, of course. But I simply couldn't this time, kiddo. The boss is really pushing us all over there, and I can't afford to lose my job. Our family can't. We really need the income. I glanced at Mom, who was sitting at the kitchen table. She nodded, though her eyes had taken on that glassy sheen again. But don't worry, Dad said. Hopefully I won't miss any more games. Your mother and I have been hoping for a while now this whole work thing will blow over real soon and everything will get back to normal again. Yeah, I said. Yeah, that'd be nice. You better believe it, kiddo. Besides, no way I'm going to miss you hitting another game-winning shot this season. Huh? Wait, how'd you know? I asked. Dad had literally just gotten home. I hadn't told him, and as far as I know, he hadn't spoken to Mom before starting to whip up the burgers. A glimmer of that ecstatic yet knowing smile hovered on his face again as he poked his temple with a plump finger. Oh, let's just say I know, Drake. I know. I barely held back another shudder as he flipped another burger in the pan. The creepy as heck grin gone once again. Chapter 12. That night, after I did my homework in my room, I watched TV until just a few minutes before midnight. Then I snuck out to the garage and wheeled my bike out the side door, being careful to close it behind me. If Dad was going out again tonight, hopefully he wouldn't see my bike was missing. It was highly unlikely, though, since it usually leaned against the wall on the opposite side of Mom's Camry out of view. The cool, crisp October air, the kind that made me feel glad I was wearing long sleeves and pants, hit me, and the full moon cast a silvery glow along the empty road and driveway. Although it was shadowy in the narrow strip, I stood in between the garage and row of shrubs bordering our property. Good. Almost no chance of Dad seeing me. The only problem was... "Ah, there you are," a familiar voice said as a figure emerged from between two of the shrubs. I let out a sharp cry and then slapped a gloved hand to my mouth. "Dana, you scared the living bat crud out of me. How could you do that? What if my dad heard?" I was glad to see she'd made it on time at least. Not that it would have been an issue, considering she only lived a couple of blocks away. She giggled as she sidled up to me, guiding her bike along. "Sorry, I just thought it'd be fun, and he's not out here yet." "Yeah, but that doesn't mean he can't hear you. The guy's got, supernatural hearing now, remember? Or, probably." "Oh yeah, true. Sorry about that." But she didn't really sound it. Instead, she swung a leg over the seat of her bike and quickly rolled her hands over the handlebars a few times as if revving up a motorcycle, all while grinning fiendishly at me. "Whatever," I muttered. Just then, the sound of the door connected to the house opening came from inside the garage, immediately followed by the rumble of one of the main garage doors opening, fairly loud now that I stood so close to it. As expected, shortly after that, Dad's silver Chevy backed slowly out of the garage and into the road. I swung myself onto my own bike. "Get ready." "Don't have to tell me, MVP." When Dad's car was a little ways down the street, Dana and I burst out from the narrow channel by the garage and pedaled after him. We tried our best to keep up with him, but stayed far enough away he couldn't see us, which wasn't that hard on our small suburban street. But then he turned onto Route 86, a larger, busier road at the end of the block, and it was much tougher to keep up. Still, I was able to do so without too much trouble, constantly whipping past 40-mile-per-hour signs and lampposts keeping the street well lit. So far we hadn't seen any cars, which made sense at this hour, and was definitely a good thing, not just because it was potentially dangerous, but because we didn't want any headlights to illuminate us. Still, I couldn't help but notice Dana was dropping farther and further behind as we went, her face becoming redder and more scrunched up and soaked with sweat. Crud. She wasn't going to make it much longer, and that was saying a lot since she was the star of practically every school team she played on, just like me. But she clearly couldn't keep pace with me and Dad's car, and to be honest, I wasn't so sure I had much left in the tank myself either. My legs had started to feel like they were being held in the middle of a burner flame like Dad's hand, but I pressed on, gritting my teeth, fighting the pain and constantly glancing behind me, only to see Dana sink further and further back. "Don't worry about me," she shouted loud enough so only I could hear. "Just keep going, no matter how much I drop behind." But, "Just do it, Drake. You can't lose sight of him. This is too important." But even as she said it, I could sense intense disappointment, and maybe even anger in her voice. She was clearly upset she couldn't keep up with me. She always was when she couldn't quite do what I could, whether it had to do with sports or grades or whatever. It made me a bit sad since that tended to happen pretty much all the time. Still, I knew she was right. I couldn't lose track of Dad. His taillights hovered over in the near distance like two tiny UFOs, just close enough to make out. I had to find out what he was up to. It could not only be incredibly important for me and my family, but maybe even all of mankind. I looked back at Dana to yell, "Okay," but then her mouth fell open as she pointed a shaky finger ahead of me. "Drake, look out!" I whipped my head back around just in time for an enormous semi-truck to plow into the middle of the road from a side street, right in front of me, mere yards away. I let out a scream so shrill it scraped the sides of my throat as I jammed on my brakes. The truck let out a blaring honk as it braked, but it was too late. There was no way to avoid the collision. I scrunched my eyes shut as I jerked the handlebars to the right as far as I could, both my bike's and the truck's tires screeching against the pavement. Chapter 13. I slammed right into the side of the truck, a surge of pain rippling through my entire body, which stopped sticking to the side of the truck. What's going on? I whipped my eyes open. My bike's handlebar, along with my entire left arm, had impaled the semi and was lodged inside, keeping me in place along the middle of the truck. Whoa, holy bat crud. I instinctively wrenched my arm away and fell hard on my back on the pavement, some kind of white, soft, freezing cold substance gushing out of the hole I just made. It pooled all around me and my bike, so I leaped to my feet and darted off to the side. The white stuff eventually stopped pouring from the massive truck, covering my bike and forming a pile about waist high. The pile lined up about half the truck's side, the sweet, delicious aroma of vanilla invading the area. Ah, frozen yogurt it had to be. The sound of the truck door thudding shut rang out, and a man with a small gut in a black long-sleeved shirt and pants raced up to me on the hill of the ice cream. His black hair was unkempt, bits of stubble fuzzing his chin and cheeks. "Holy smokes! You all right, kid?" "Yeah, come to think of it, I didn't feel any pain at all. Not even in my arm, which had just penetrated the side of a freaking metal semi-truck. Wait a minute, how is that even possible?" A sparkle crept into the man's eyes despite his utterly horrified expression. "God dang, it's a miracle! I mean, I literally heard you slam into this thing, kid. It sounded bad. Like, real bad." "Yeah," I murmured. I was shivering uncontrollably, probably from the sheer fear and shock. I mean, I just plain couldn't wrap my head around what just happened. It really was a miracle. "Oh my God, Drake, are you all right?" Dana's bike skidded to a stop beside me and she jumped off. "Yeah," I said. "Somehow." "You must have a body of steel or something, kid," the man said, "to be okay after that crazy crash." "Yeah, seriously. Once again, how did that actually happen? I mean, I was going pretty fast, but it definitely didn't seem fast enough to smash an arm-sized hole in the side of a metal semi-truck, unless the metal was actually extremely thin and my handlebar was top-notch steel or something. Plus, there was still the incredibly weird fact that my arm appeared totally fine and didn't even hurt. Dana chuckled. "Well, that's Drake. Always doing amazing things, right, hun? I mean, Drake?" "What the? Hun?" She never called me that before. Man, today was just getting weirder and weirder, just like every day lately, it seemed. The man's forehead was a mass of squiggles. Even he was surprised. "He your boyfriend or something, sweetie?" What? No way," she spat. "Yeah, definitely not," I said. Seriously, what a ridiculous idea. Dana was more my sister than anything. We'd just become a lot more comfortable around each other lately, that was all. A part of growing up, for sure. A kind of knowing but not creepy smile fanned the man's face. A nice change of pace. Then he looked back at the truck, scratching his stubbly chin. "You must have hit the truck at a perfect angle or something to pierce it like that, kid." But then he shook his disheveled head. No, that doesn't make any sense. Jesus." He heaved a huge shrug as he let out a long sigh. "Well, I don't know how you did it, kid, but you're lucky you're not only not injured, but you're even alive in the first place. Talk about some serious good fortune there." His eyes bugged wide. "Wait, you haven't been touched, have you, boy?" "Oh no," I said. "Definitely not." His eyes returned to normal. "Ah, okay then. Crazy good luck then, I guess." "Tell me about it," I said. "For sure." Dana wrapped both her arms around one of mine again, then quickly removed them. The man raised another eyebrow at her, then sighed again as he shifted his gaze back to the truck. "Man, corporate's gonna kill me. The boss will have my head on a silver plaque on the wall of that enormous spiffy office of his. Say, what are you kids doing out riding your bikes at this hour of night anyway?" Dana and I exchanged glances. Nothing," I said. "Just out for a joyride, sir," Dana said. The man's brown eyes dulled as his jaw slackened. Right. Don't worry. I don't really want to know anyway. I guess I gotta call the cops now to barricade this area off until all the stuff gets cleaned up. You kids run along home now. Maybe even cuddle up next to each other in front of a nice warm fireplace with some hot cocoa when you get back. Dana and I shot each other puzzled looks. What the heck was this guy talking about? He chuckled. You ought to try it. You might find you enjoy it. A lot. A sort of wistful expression hung on his face as he gazed off into what appeared to be nowhere. Weirdo. Okay, Dana said. Wait, I said. My bike. Oh, right, the man said. The three of us dug my bike out from the middle of the frozen yogurt pile with our hands. It didn't take long, but the dessert's freezing coldness gnawed right through my gloves and refused to go away. When we finally got my bike free, Dana and I got on each of ours again, both shivering like crazy now. But as we did, I couldn't help but notice something a little further down the road past the semi-truck and off to the side of the street, clearly visible behind a narrow, sparse forest of white palm trees. It was a hulking skyscraper with what appeared to be all its lights on, and there was no mistaking whose office building it was. Dad's. I'd been so preoccupied with trying to catch up with Dad and penetrating the semi-truck with my arm and all, I hadn't even realized who'd been in the neighborhood. And right on cue, I spotted Dad's silver Chevy sitting in the parking lot in the back row toward the edge of the forest. Work? I murmured. Work? What? Dana asked. What's up? My dad. He's been sneaking out of the house in the middle of the night and was out all last night to be at freaking work? Chapter 14. All I could do was stare at his car until my vision became one giant silver blur. I mean, you had to be absolutely kidding me. Like, absolutely, totally, completely kidding me. He was at work right now, where he was already spending way too much of his freaking time recently as it was. It was just unbelievable. Truly unbelievable. Wait, what do you mean? Dana asked. I pointed toward Dad's car and office building. Oh. I started pedaling toward them, easing my way along the extremely narrow stretch of road along the side of the truck. Hey, where are you going? Dana asked. But I didn't answer, just kept biking toward the entrance to the corporate area. A split second later, Dana's tires glided across the pavement behind me. Take it easy, kids, the truck driver yelled after us. And remember, warm fire, hot cocoa, maybe even a couple of marshmallows for the cocoa. Can't go wrong. What a weird guy. But I was barely paying attention to him as I veered onto the road leading to Dad's office building. On the way, I passed a large, completely lit sign along the side of the street that read, FarmCore Labs, the name of the major pharmaceutical company he worked for. I biked past the massive, also completely lit parking lot full of cars right up to the building entrance. It was quite a structure, really, stretching up to 30 floors and made mostly of glass and narrow horizontal strips of white concrete. Smooth asphalt pathways lined with heavy-looking spiky plants hugged the building's sides, too, a series of lamps illuminating them all. Speaking of which, light beamed from practically every single window, making the whole place feel like it was literally pulsing with life. And it was. Through nearly all the windows, I could make out people going about their work. Some were glued to their computer screens, others walked through hallways, and more sat in meeting rooms in the middle of meetings and presentations. But nothing about this picture made any sense. Why? I murmured. Why are they all working so hard in the middle of the freaking night? And how? They worked all day, too. And maybe even all last night, I couldn't help but think. I don't know, Dana said between labored breaths. She had sidled up behind me, also still on her bike. I'm as baffled as you are, MVP. Heh, I wasn't so crazy about the nickname, but I kinda liked it when she said it. There was still one window of the magnificent building I hadn't checked out yet, the one that belonged to Dad's office. I'd been there a few times during the summer when Mom was at work and there had been no summer camp at the time, so I knew where it was. Sure enough, both the computer and lights were on in his office, but no one was sitting at his desk. That's weird, I said. What? Dana asked. Yeah, what? Asked an incredibly familiar voice, and I nearly jolted off my bike in surprise. Sure enough, there stood Dad, smiling jovially, just a few yards away outside the building's all-glass double-door entrance. He was decked out in his typical work suit, still with the navy blue tie from this morning, and held what appeared to be his office coffee mug. The phrase, "Farmcore Labs Rocks," was printed on the mug in big black font. "Hey there, kiddos. How nice of you two to come visit me at my work tonight. How are you guys doing?" he asked as his smile seemed to suddenly switch to a maniacal one. Chapter 15. "Hi, Dad," I said. "How's it going?" Dana's body stiffened noticeably beside me. "Hello, Mr. Hamilton." At least I wasn't the only one with a stuttering affliction. Dad's eyes grew misty as half his smile slid off his face. "No need to be frightened, guys. It's just me." He glanced at the building and then back at us, fiddling with his tie with his free hand. "Look, I know this must be a pretty surprising thing to say at least. You know, witnessing me and everybody else in my company hard at work here in the middle of the night. But you see, we just so happen to be in the midst of an incredible breakthrough with one of our latest drugs. Like, an absolutely extraordinarily incredible breakthrough that could massively impact the entire world. Dad, what's going on? Like, what's really going on?" I folded my arms across my chest as I ground the hardest gaze I ever had in my entire life into him. I just couldn't stand it anymore. "I know you've been touched, and that you were out all last night and weren't even tired this morning. Heck, you don't even look the tiniest bit tired right now." I wasn't exaggerating. He appeared as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as ever. "So it's about time you came clean and told me and Dana." I glanced at her. "Well, everything." His smile dropped completely from his face, his gaze hardening on me, and then came that thing again, that weird, tiny, sharp thing trying to penetrate my brain like it did this morning. It was coming straight from Dad's mind, there's no doubt about it, but I immediately fought it again with my own mind, and this time it practically shot out as quickly as it entered. His eyes went all cloudy, and he vigorously shook his head as if trying to regain control of his own brain or something. Weird. Like, so freaking weird. "Dad, what in the flaming gates of heck was that?" "You're seriously freaking me out right now. Come on, spill. You've got to tell me and Dana exactly what's going on. Now." Silence wafted along the asphalt path we stood on, the night cool and still. Dana didn't move a single muscle beside me. Finally, Dad let out a long, weary sigh, his gaze dipping into his coffee mug. "All right. Obviously, I didn't want to tell you this, neither of you, but," he looked back at us, eyes sharp and crisp now, "these extraterrestrials who have been visiting Earth lately, believe it or not, they've actually been improving mankind." "Huh?" I asked. "What? Really?" Dana's face was paler than the silvery moon and stars hanging above us. "How?" Exactly what I wanted to know. "Well," Dad said, "you see, when they touch people, it's sort of their way of weeding out humanity's chaff, so to speak. Basically, when someone is touched, they receive a supernatural essence or entity, if you will, from the aliens. And what this entity does is determine the worth and potential of that particular person and then, well, makes a decision accordingly." A shiver rippled along both my shoulders and collarbones. He wasn't saying what I thought he was saying, was he? "What do you mean, exactly?" "Well, for example, people who aren't very good or who don't have the ability or potential to improve mankind in any way, or at least very much, they die. Meaning their heads explode, which I had to say sounded a little intense for such an operation, but who was I to argue with an extremely advanced species process? As far as people like me and basically everyone else who works here at Farmcore Labs, we're good, intelligent people who are continually contributing to mankind's evolution, so we get to keep this supernatural entity or so-called superpowers the aliens have given us so we can continue to contribute to humanity even more effectively." I let that sink in. Dana stayed quiet too. As totally insane as it sounded, it did make sense. I couldn't speak to the many people who had been touched around the world, of course, but it explained Chad's death at least. That kid was definitely no good, and it was definitely unlikely he would have matured and grown into a good person who would contribute to mankind someday. Plus, now I got why Dad had been so overly excited about his job recently. Despite the fact that he's been working so much overtime the past couple of years or so, he'd always been passionate about his job, but the aliens basically just deemed him and what he did as important to mankind. So, I said, that means everyone who's been touched but claimed they lost their powers an hour later, they were lying. In reality, they were deemed good, productive people by the aliens and knew that after the entity had evaluated them. Dad nodded slowly. The government knows this, of course. Every single government in the world does. But they don't want to tell people because it could create even more pandemonium than what's already going on. The public considers this whole extraterrestrial thing an international tragedy or phenomenon of sorts. But if they knew it was actually a process of weeding out the so-called least worthy humans and that all the humans in power knew about it and condoned it, well, there would likely be all kinds of riots and unrest all around the world on top of all this heads-exploding madness. Yeah, that was probably true. It was actually surprising there weren't more riots happening right now just plain because everyone was so incredibly spooked. Although now that I thought about it, maybe loads of people weren't rioting because they didn't want to attract the aliens' attention for fear of being touched. So, I said, all the governments are not only in cahoots with this whole crazy alien thing, but they're in favor of it? Yes, Dad said, because ultimately, it's truly for the best. The extraterrestrials are helping us out. They want to help us. That's really what this is all about. I see, I said. But why? Dana asked. Well, Dad said, I don't know. Unfortunately, but I imagine it's simply an act of kindness. After all, to even reach our beloved planet in the first place, these extraterrestrials must be incredibly advanced, the likes of which us humans can't even begin to comprehend at this stage of our evolution. And committing acts of sheer kindness, ones that don't involve asking for anything in return, that is a highly advanced trait, something most humans lack or greatly struggle with today, even after all these generations. However, this characteristic is clearly nothing short of second nature for these lovely aliens, so we should be incredibly grateful for their beautiful gift. So incredibly grateful. His eyes grew misty again as he looked up toward the night sky as though he was thanking them silently right this very moment. Maybe he was. Lovely aliens. That was the absolute last phrase I thought I'd hear ever since the frightening creatures started invading Earth. Same with calling their touch a beautiful gift. But I guess Dad was right. We should be grateful for them and what they were doing. So don't worry about it, Dad said. This whole extraterrestrial ordeal will be over before you know it. I don't know how many humans the aliens plan on touching exactly, but I know they're starting to wind down already. That went in line with the fact the number of people being touched was going down, although I couldn't help but wonder why they only planned on touching a certain number of people. If they were weeding out humanity's chaff, so to speak, wouldn't they touch a lot more, even every single human on Earth if they could? The last few days have just been a bit of a courtesy of the aliens as they pass along their way to somewhere else, Dad said, to bigger and better things. I personally haven't a clue where or what exactly, but from what I understand, the fantastic little creatures will be gone, at least for now. I felt my shoulders slump. Oh, that's too bad. Yeah, Dana said. I was sort of starting to like them now. Dad let out a chuckle. Same with me. And then a horrifying thought occurred to me, one that froze my veins and made it hard to push air out of my lungs. What if Dana or I got touched before the aliens left and weren't considered worthy enough? What if the aliens deemed us bad and incapable of benefiting humanity and made our heads explode? Chapter 16. As if reading my mind, Dad said, "And don't worry, you two will be absolutely fine during this whole process. You're good kids, and you clearly have loads of potential and so much to offer humanity. So there's absolutely no way anything bad could possibly happen to you. I promise, okay?" Dana nodded, her eyes lost in outer space. "Okay," I found myself murmuring. As I did, what felt like a planet-sized load lifted off my shoulders. I was pretty sure I never felt so relieved in my entire life. This whole alien thing, it really had been driving me absolutely bat-crud crazy. Come to think of it, why hadn't Dad just told me this before, just to put me at ease during such an incredibly terrifying time? Then again, I guessed if he had, there was a chance I might have accidentally leaked the colossal secret to other people, which would have caused mass pandemonium. It was best to not let me or anyone else know the truth until the whole ordeal was over, or until I'd been touched myself if I ever was. Either way, now Dad had to trust Dana and me to keep the secret. But make sure you keep abiding by the extraterrestrial rules at all times, Dad said. You don't want to cause any trouble at school with your teachers or tip anyone off you know more than you should. This is all strictly confidential information, understood? Not for public disclosure, including your school's faculty, okay? Right, I said. Definitely, Dana said. Dad gave a light chuckle. How about that? You know more than your very own teachers about this extraordinary time in human history. Bet you never thought that would happen, eh? No, I said. Definitely not. Dana shook her head. Thanks so much for telling us, Mr. Hamilton. Dad beamed. You got it, kiddos. What about that thing you've been doing with your mind? I asked. You know, where you try to, pierce my mind or something? Huh? Dana's eyes bulged so much it was almost funny. This was clearly a horrifying concept for her, too. Dad tilted back slightly and laughed. Oh, that? Well, that's obviously part of the superpowers I have now that I've been touched. I was merely trying to calm you down by, directly influencing your brain. You seemed a little rattled there, kiddo. You both did. Now how about I give you both a lift home? It's about time you got some sleep, don't you think? Don't want to be tired at school tomorrow, eh? Dana and I agreed, so we left our bikes there. Dad said he'd bring them home from work later when there would be room in the back of his car, and he dropped us off each at our houses. We had to go the longer way since the part of the road where I collided with the semi-truck had been roped off, a couple of cop cars with flashing lights parked beside it. Dana and I didn't bother to tell Dad what happened there, though. It would probably just upset him, and everything turned out all right anyway. As I lay in bed later that night, all tucked in, I felt the most at peace I had in the past few days, maybe even my entire life. I mean, thank God everything was going to be okay. In fact, everything would be even better than okay after the aliens finally finished their whole human weeding process and continued on to wherever they were going. Now I couldn't help but wonder where that was exactly, and what they were planning on doing there, or where they came from. Dad obviously didn't know, or maybe the government did, or all of Earth's governments. Really, though, it was kind of a shame Dad didn't just tell me all this earlier. I wouldn't have been nearly so stressed, but I totally got why he didn't. It was so important to keep the truth about the extraterrestrial secret from the public at all costs. Like Dad said, it was kind of cool in a way, knowing this insanely enormous secret most of humanity didn't even have a clue about. I felt like I was cooler on the inside or something, but obviously that wasn't really true. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. That was all. Still, it must have been pretty amazing to be Dad right now. To not only have the incredible superpowers, but to know he got to keep them because he was a good person who had the potential to help mankind, and actually was helping mankind, right now, in the middle of the night. Then it hit me full force. An intense, overwhelming desire to be touched. I looked up at the ceiling, which was only a little illuminated since I only had my nightstand lamp on, imagining I was gazing right at the aliens themselves, maybe at their spaceships since they might have been invisible or something, just hovering there in the atmosphere above our planet. Please, oh please, dear little aliens, please touch me. I'm a good person, a really good person, just like my dad, and I can and really want to help my species so much, just like him. So please, touch me now. You just have to. Please, touch me right now. Then I lay there and waited for a tiny pale man to randomly appear beside me and touch a part of my bare flesh, just like in my dream, and what happened to loads of people all around the world. But nothing happened. The room stayed totally still and silent. I silently asked the aliens to touch me again, and I waited a few more minutes, but still, nothing happened. Come on, please, I said out loud, my voice bouncing off my bedroom walls. You guys couldn't find a better person to touch, I swear. You have to touch me, please. I know you can hear me. I mean, they had to be able to, right? They were like super advanced and everything. Pretty, pretty please? But still, nothing happened. My room stayed dim and silent. Why? Why weren't they listening to me? It wasn't like it was too late or anything. They touched people at night all the time. So I kept asking and begging them to touch me, both silently and out loud, before eventually drifting off into yet another restless sleep. Chapter 17. Unfortunately, the next morning was pretty miserable. 2 nights in a row of patchy sleep was really starting to take its toll, and it didn't help I still hadn't been touched. Just to be absolutely sure I hadn't been during the night without knowing it, I tried to levitate both myself and my alarm clock with my mind again as soon as I woke up, but I wasn't able to. Of course. Why would the stupid little aliens touch me? I might have been a good person with loads of potential, but I hadn't actually been using any of it. Not yet, anyway. I mean, sure, I was always getting straight A's and was the star of every sports team I ever played on at school, but all that stuff was for me. It wasn't like I was creating groundbreaking pharmaceutical drugs that helped all of mankind like Dad, or nursed incredibly sick people back to health like Mom. Wait a minute. Come to think of it, I barreled out of my room, downstairs and into the kitchen where Mom and Dad were already making breakfast. Mom whirled around from where she was scrambling eggs at the counter, and Dad whipped his head up from the newspaper he was reading. "Mom, have you been touched by the aliens lately?" She and Dad exchanged glances, Mom's expression basically saying, "He's going to find out sooner or later anyway." I could usually read her pretty well. She sighed as she turned the burner down to low, the eggs sizzling dying down in the pan. "Yes, honey, I've been touched, both your father and I have." Oh, great. I slumped down on a chair at the table and stared down to the tabletop. Well, not that it wasn't great, of course. Obviously, it was awesome the aliens considered both Mom and Dad worthy humans, with loads of potential to help mankind. It was just so infuriating that I hadn't been touched, too. I mean, I was the only one in the family who hadn't been now, for God's sake. "Don't be jealous, honey," Dad said. "It's completely random. There's absolutely no rhyme or reason why we've been touched and you haven't, okay? So don't worry about it." "That's right, dear," Mom said. "And to be honest, you probably won't be either, since the number of touched people has gone down even more since yesterday. The aliens are probably finishing up in the next couple days or so, or at least that appears to be the case." "Oh, really? But..." Not only did I want to be considered a so-called worthy human, I wanted those wicked cool superpowers too. I mean, the whole thing was insanely awesome when you thought about it, and now there was a chance I might never be touched at all. So weird when I thought about it. One day being utterly terrified of being touched, the next day wanting it more than life itself. "But what?" Mom asked. "Oh, nothing. Never mind." And I went back upstairs and got ready for school. But on the inside, I was totally crumbling, shattering into a zillion little pieces like a decade-old Christmas cookie dropped to the floor. I mean, it was annoying enough the extraterrestrials hadn't touched me at all, but especially when I was asking them to, no, begging them. I mean, seriously, hardly anyone else in the world would be doing that right now, and I was clearly such a good person with loads of potential, just like Mom and Dad, right? This was so not fair. So not fair. And to make matters worse, when I got to Dana's and my usual table in the cafeteria at school, her eyes were beaming, her 2 freckles practically popping off her much rosier than usual face. Well, that wasn't necessarily bad, but... What? What is it? I hadn't meant to snap at her, but I couldn't help it. "Drake, you're not gonna believe it." She gripped my arm with both hands again, hard, and didn't remove them this time as she leaned in to whisper into my ear. "Last night?" Her hot breath tickled my eardrum, and although it sounds kind of weird, especially considering how insanely grumpy I was at the moment, I actually kind of liked it. I was touched." I ripped my arm out of her grasp as I jerked my head away from hers. "What?" I asked. "Are you serious?" I couldn't have possibly heard that correctly, right? Chapter 18. She nodded vigorously, wearing the biggest smile I'd ever seen. It would have actually been kind of cute if not for my intense grumpiness. "Yep," she said. "Last night, before I went to sleep, I asked the aliens to touch me, since your dad said I'm a good person who could benefit society a lot just like you. And wouldn't you know it, one of them actually did. One of them actually did, Drake. And yeah, it was this pale little dude like everybody who's been touched has been saying. Come to think of it, it was actually kind of adorable, and it appeared right on my bed and touched my left cheek. I wasn't wearing my ski mask, of course, because, I obviously wanted to be touched. But it was absolutely amazing, Drake. Absolutely incredibly out of this world amazing. And now I have, all these insanely awesome superpowers and everything. Isn't that, so incredibly awesome, Drake?" A great numbness settled deep into me, black matter swirling around inside me until it whipped into an all-consuming twister. How could they? How could the stupid little aliens touch Dana Rebecca Haversall but not me, Drake Michael Hamilton? And why? Don't get me wrong, I was happy for Dana, incredibly happy, but it was just so absurdly unfair. Right, Drake? Right? Drake? I snapped back to the moment. Yeah, that's awesome, Dana. Really cool. Congratulations." She slid further away from me and crossed her arms across her chest. "Well, you could sound at least a little more excited for me." True. I definitely said it in a sort of monotone, robotish voice. "Oh, right. No, yeah, I'm really excited for you, Dana. Really, I am. I mean, well..." "What? What is it?" "Well, it's just that..." Her eyes sank a bit, her body slouching a little into her chair. "What? Oh, you haven't been touched yet?" All I could manage was a tiny shake of my head. "Oh well, that's all right. I'm sure it doesn't mean anything. Like your dad said, it's completely random, and it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. There's still a couple of days left after all." Yeah, I guess. But I couldn't help to think of what Mom said, how it was much less likely now that it appeared the aliens were finishing up. "Come on, buck up, buckaroo," a small part of me chuckled. She always used antiquated, overly lame words when trying to make me feel better. "Everything's going to be okie dokie, you'll see, I promise." I nodded. "Okay, yeah, if you say so." But I didn't believe it. Not the tiniest bit. But there was no point in letting that on now. "Of course I do." She smiled an even bigger smile, though it seemed strained in a way. Poor Dana. She was so pumped about being touched, but I was too much in the dumps to be excited with her. Despite my horrifically awful mood, though, a fun idea popped into my head. "Hey, since you have such awesome superpowers now, do you think you could do something crazy like freeze over the cafeteria clock with a layer of ice or something? For, just a couple of seconds?" Despite the fact I was so bummed out, I had to admit it would be pretty cool to see my best friend do something supernatural. But the smile dropped off her face, and she rubbed one of her shoulders with her hand, her gaze darting off to the side. "Oh, well, I think it's better I don't." "What? Why not? That'd be seriously cool." "Honestly, I'd rather not." "Why not?" She let out a long sigh and arched her back as she scratched it with one hand. "Well, here's the thing, Drake. We're not really supposed to use our superpowers for stuff like that." "Huh? Really?" "Yepers. You see, when people do crazy things like fly around in public or make the moon turn purple, that's part of what makes the alien entity inside them, not choose them. Because those things are, well, kind of pointless in a way. I mean, no offense, I totally get what you mean about it being cool if I froze over the clock, but no one who has the potential to contribute to mankind would, do something that silly. Oh. God, maybe I didn't deserve to be touched. Here, these incredibly advanced extraterrestrials were giving some of us humans amazing superpowers, and all I wanted to do was freeze clocks and fly around like a total moron, sort of like what Chad and the other people who weren't chosen by the aliens had done. I could feel my face grow hot. God, I was such an idiot. A complete and total moron. I gazed up at the ceiling as though looking at the aliens. Now I get it, guys. Now I know why you haven't touched me. I'm a loser, a complete and total loser. I think it also sort of comes down to humility in a sense, too, Dana said. Huh? Like, what do you mean? Like, another super important trait the alien entity looks for is how humble a person is. And a humble person wouldn't go doing those things either because, well, it's sort of like showing off. You know, like, hey, look what I can do that you guys can't, you know? Ah, oh God. Not only was I a total moron, but I also wasn't humble either. I was nothing short of a big, stupid, cocky jerk. But don't worry, she said quickly. It's not a big deal, really. So please, don't be jealous. If I'd known you would have been jealous, I would have just never mentioned it that I'd been touched. Seriously. Plus, when you think about it, the whole thing's really kind of pointless anyway. What? What do you mean? What in the flaming gates of heck was she talking about? Well, it is not pointless, I snapped before I could stop myself. A little spittle even spritzed from my mouth and my face immediately grew hot. Great. Way to look like even more of a total caveman, Drake, especially in front of Dana. She jerked back even further from me, her eyes tiny pools of water, and then the bell rang. We headed to our classes, silent the whole way. The entire rest of the day I could barely pay attention in any of my classes. I was still so upset about not being touched and acting like a total cocky moron, especially in front of Dana. Still, whenever I got the chance, in my head, I asked the aliens to touch me, begged and prayed for them to. Please, little aliens, I promise I won't do anything dumb or arrogant like freeze clocks over or fly around. I'll only use my superpowers for good, I promise. But nothing ever happened. The aliens never touched me, and unfortunately the trend continued over the next couple of days. I kept begging, and the aliens kept ignoring me. To make it all even worse, the day after that, the reports of people being touched finally reached 0. Apparently the aliens were officially finished giving us humans their stupid courtesy, and they hadn't even bothered to give me a teeny tiny little touch. Needless to say, I was an absolute basket case at that point. Apparently so obviously, even Dana avoided me when she could. Stupid, idiotic Dana. She got touched by the stupid, annoying aliens, and same with Mom and Dad. But no, God forbid they give Drake Michael Hamilton, an awesome human being with loads of potential, the same godforsaken courtesy. I kinda miss the extraterrestrials. I barely heard Boris Yanley say amid the lunchtime chatter that day from the table next to Dana's and mine. Dana and I had been eating lunch in silence as usual. Apparently she didn't even want to speak with me, but at least she still ate with me. Yeah, George Kraft said, sitting across from Boris. They might have made people's heads explode, but at least they made things a little interesting around here. At that moment I snapped. It just happened. I dropped my turkey sandwich to my lunch tray, popped to my feet, and stormed over to George and Boris's table, my feet making loud thuds. That is absolute complete bat crud, I yelled, hovering above them. The whole cafeteria went completely silent, and I could feel every single eye in the room trained on me. The aliens are total idiots. I mean, any idiot can see that. I mean, they were killing innocent people, for God's sake. Lots of people. And they even killed Chad Evans, your friend. Sure, Chad was a complete and total idiot himself, but he was your friend, you total morons. A long silence wafted through the cafeteria, a vacuum that seemed to last for all eternity. George was completely still, but Boris kept calmly eating what looked to be a bologna sandwich. He swallowed and washed it down with a sip of juice, then pulled his hulking frame to his feet and looked me straight in the eyes. We were about the same height, though he was a good deal bigger than me. Not that that mattered, though. I was probably stronger than him. What did you say, MVP? What, are you deaf or something? I said. He gave me a small shove, though not enough for me to lose balance. Hey, knock it off! I shoved him back harder. He made to shove me even harder, but I beat him to it, using all my strength this time. He sailed backwards over his chair and landed hard on the ground, groaning as he did. The chair toppled over, making a loud clatter. Boris launched to his feet, cocked his fist back, and was about to land a punch when the 6th grade science teacher, Mr. Simmons, grabbed him around the waist and yanked him back. Someone did the same with me, too. Hey, cool it, you two! Oh, mother of bat crud. It was Principal Belden. "Drake, I want to speak with you in my office right now." He let go of my waist, and I heaved a deep sigh as I followed his heavy stride out of the cafeteria. As I went, I couldn't help but notice Mr. Simmons still had his arms wrapped around George Kraft, despite the fact that he was still now. Regardless, George gave me an evil eye. As for Boris, he was gingerly climbing to his feet, appearing to be okay. Although I was still fuming with anger, I guessed that it was a good time. I hadn't really meant to hurt him. I was just so incredibly frustrated with the whole not being touched by the alien situation. Yeah, that was really it. Even though Boris and George had been, heck, always were, total jerks, I hadn't really been angry with them. As I continued to follow Mr. Belden down the long, desolate hallway outside the cafeteria, I could feel sweat sprouting along my forehead. Way to go, Drake. You've really done it now. Once again, you've acted like a total caveman, and for the first time in your entire life, you're going to the freaking principal's office. God, this wasn't me. I mean, I didn't do stuff like this. Never. Something was clearly wrong with me. Extremely wrong. When we entered Mr. Belden's office, he closed the door and motioned to the puny metal chair in front of his desk. I sat down on it, groaning inwardly. The chair was incredibly uncomfortable, like a steel block wedged against my butt. Probably made that way purposefully for kids who got in trouble. Mr. Belden rounded the desk and sat in his huge cushioned chair, of course. He folded his thick arms across his chest, though his facial features softened as he took me in with his dark hazel eyes. "Drake, what's going on with you? I've never seen you act this way before. It's very unnerving, to say the least. Is everything okay at home?" I looked out the window, which framed one of the spiky evergreen succulent plants lining the school. Yeah, it's fine. Not really. Taking in the blue sky with puffy white clouds behind the plants, emotion crashed into me, overwhelming me, and I started to cry. I couldn't help it. This whole extraterrestrial thing, it's really getting to me, Mr. Belden. His eyes dimmed as he plucked a tissue from a tissue box on his desk and held it out to me. I took it, dabbed my eyes, and blew my nose before discarding it in the wastebasket by his desk. "I see," he said. "And that's understandable, Drake. It's driving us all crazy, believe me. Although, thankfully, it appears to be all over now." I barely managed a weak smile. Yeah, I sure hope so. I wanted to tell him what was really bothering me, but knew I couldn't. Sure, I was incredibly upset and hated those stupid little pale men right about now, but I couldn't betray their secret, even if they were officially gone, even though it felt like they'd betrayed me. At the end of the day, it was just too important, and if I did blow their secret, who knew what would happen then? Maybe they'd come soaring back to Earth and actually smite me on the spot or something. Maybe even both Mr. Belden and me to make sure that info never left this room. If they could even hear me at this point or cared in the slightest what I did, either way, it definitely wasn't worth the risk. "Unfortunately," Mr. Belden said, "I still have to tell your parents. Shoving a student to the ground, that's unacceptable behavior here at Pacific Valley Middle School. Boris Yanley could have been hurt." I looked down at the ground, which was surprisingly faded and grimy. How often did this custodian clean this place? "I know." "Good. And don't get me wrong, I know you better. You're a good kid. In fact, I think this is the first time you've ever been in my office, and I've never heard a single complaint from a teacher about you all the years you've been here." That was true. "Which is why I'm not going to dole out any further punishment other than notifying your parents." I whipped my head back up. Well, that was good news. But Mom and Dad weren't going to be happy. "Thanks so much, Mr. Belden." I wiped the last of the tears from my eyes. "I really, really appreciate it." "But I expect better behavior from you here on out, young man. Much better. And keep following the 3 extraterrestrial rules at all costs, okay? Just because there haven't been any new cases in the last 24 hours or so doesn't mean we're out of the woods just yet." Yes, definitely, I will." I let out an internal sigh, my chest feeling a billion times lighter already. Good. He dismissed me from his office. As soon as I got home that day, Dad called for me to enter his office, which was across from the living room. Both he and Mom were in there, Dad at his desk and Mom at his side holding her mid-afternoon coffee. Even though the lights were dim for some reason, the wattage was never too high in there. I could immediately tell from their darker than usual eyes and tightened facial features that I was in deep trouble. "Look," I said, and explained what happened during lunchtime and why. As I did, their faces grew puffier and puffier, their shoulders drooping more and more. Even the room's lights seemed to grow dimmer, which had to be my imagination. When I finished, they exchanged glances. "I think we ought to tell him the truth now, honey," Dad said. Mom nodded, looking down into her coffee mug as if she wished she could disappear into its depths. Uh-oh, this couldn't be good. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, you see, Drake," Dad fiddled with his tie, a slim, dark green one today. "The thing about the alien invasion, well, He glanced at Mom again, but she was still gazing into her cup. "Well, it doesn't actually exist." Chapter 19. "What?" I found myself blurting. I could tell my lips kept shifting, but nothing came out. I mean, what could I possibly say? My body felt like it was encased in concrete cemented to the ground. "It's all a ruse, honey," Dad said. "Of sorts." I just stared at him. He and Mom were going to have to start explaining things, and fast. "You see, honey," he said, "my company, FarmCore Labs," I wanted to say, "Yes, I know what it's called," but held back, "has been working on a drug for many years now. It's a powerful top-secret drug that can drastically improve the functionality and mental capacity of the human brain." "Yes," Mom said. "Basically, it makes you a ton smarter and more capable of things you never thought were even possible in the first place." "Wait," I said. "Are you meaning to say the superpowers?" Dad nodded. "This drug gives a whole new lease on the term mind over matter, son. When you ingest this drug, you can literally do absolutely anything, including all the crazy things so-called touch people have been doing lately." "That's right," Mom said. "In fact, this drug has the power to totally reinvent humanity as we know it. You know, once it's totally perfected." "Wow," I murmured. That was really cool, I mean, even though this crazy drug had been clearly causing so many tragic deaths. Wait, so what actually happened? You know, why did all those people die? "Well," Dad said, "it's admittedly been very tough perfecting this drug, and the process has led to many versions over the many years. So it just so happens that very recently we created a version that had a few awful, unexpected side effects." "Extremely awful and unexpected," Mom said. "Right," Dad said. "For one, this particular version happens to, make a very high percentage of people's heads explode shortly after they ingest it." I could feel a frown shape my face as a sharp quiver cut deep through my gut. "Yes, definitely an unfortunate side effect." "The other problem," Dad said, "is that once the body breaks down the potentially deadly stuff, it secretes right through the person's skin." "Right," Mom said. "And unfortunately, it also happens to be a highly contagious substance. So if you're secreting the stuff and touch someone else's bare skin with your own, you transpose some of it to them, and they wouldn't even know it, and then they're at huge risk of dying and spreading it to someone else." "Ah," I said. "So let me guess. The drug somehow broke out of a FarmCore Labs laboratory at some point." Dad nodded, his eyebrows drooping. Was a complete and horrible disaster, obviously, and it's the whole reason we have the 3 extraterrestrial rules in the first place." Yeah, made sense, and explained why people's heads weren't exploding anymore. The extraterrestrials hadn't left Earth on their way to some greater, nobler deed like Dad had said. The drug had finally stopped secreting from people's skin and dried up because everybody had been obeying the rules. "So," I said, "the whole alien invasion thing, it was all just a cover-up the whole time?" "Yep," Mom said, as Dad said, "by all the governments in the world. FarmCore Labs had to alert them immediately of the accidental outbreak in Florida, and together they created a plan of action." This explained how the stuff spread all over the world extremely quickly, like within a day or so. I vaguely even remembered how the very first cases were in Florida, And all the accounts of people seeing and being touched by little white men all over the world must have been made up and planted in the media by all the governments. They couldn't let everyone know FarmCorp was the culprit for such a massive, deadly outbreak, Dad said, since it would put all its employees' lives at risk. Right. FarmCorp Lab had locations all around the world, hundreds of thousands of employees. I remember Dad saying once, and there would be loads of infuriated people out there who wouldn't hesitate to harm or even kill some of them for this horrific tragedy. And the governments couldn't claim it was some kind of new virus or disease spreading around the world, Mom said. I mean, even if it was new, a disease that gave people superpowers? It was much too outlandish. It actually made more sense to invent an outlandish story like an alien invasion to go along with it. Yeah, I see. But then, what about you guys? You both claimed you've been touched, and I've seen you do some pretty crazy supernatural type stuff, Dad. I mean, did you guys accidentally ingest the drug and happen to be the small percentage who survived its effects or something? Not that I was complaining, but I just had to know. A huge smile framed Dad's face, surprisingly as creepy looking as the one he'd been wearing a lot lately. The skin along my back prickled into goose flesh. Sort of, he said. You see, honey, FarmCorp Labs managed to work out the kinks to that recent drug version shortly after it broke out and let its employees ingest it. That way they can be even more productive than they already are. That's right, Mom said. And I actually wasn't touched or exposed to the drug myself. Wait, I said. More productive? Was that why Dad was now working all hours of the night in addition to during the day? Dad nodded super hard, his eyes flaring wide, his smile stretching even wider if possible. Nails gently scraped along my goose flesh now. That's right, honey. You see, now that FarmCorp Labs has mastered this absolutely incredible and extraordinary drug, and all us employees have ingested it, the drug's allowing us to make even more incredible and extraordinary drugs. I mean, with such miraculous advancement in our mental faculties, our potential is literally limitless. And therefore, so is both FarmCorp Labs and humanity's itself. Dad's plump body was literally gyrating in his chair, his eyes crazy now, bugging larger than full-grown cockroaches. It's all so unbelievably incredible and amazing, Drake. Just so unbelievably incredible and amazing. So much that it's invigoratingly exciting. Even to this very day, no, this very hour, this very minute, this very second, I still can't even begin to fathom just how utterly exciting and incredible and amazing and extraordinary this whole process has been, and what absolutely exciting and incredible and amazing and extraordinary developments await us in the very near future, and, again, not just when it comes to FarmCorp Labs and its hundreds of thousands of employees, but the entire pharmaceutical industry at large, and all of humanity, and maybe even beyond all of that, because of all the absolutely incredible, amazing, exciting, and extraordinary things we've been creating, and will continue to create into the future, and then Dad's head exploded. Chapter 20. The next few days were a total blur. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I felt like I was barely alive, a vegetable entrenched in my bed or on the living room couch if I somehow managed to drag myself downstairs, which was kind of silly, really, since I never even bothered to turn on the TV or anything when I did. All I could do was lie or mope around, my gut either clenched up in a horrible coil of pain or completely devoid of any feeling whatsoever. It was just plain impossible to get over the fact that Dad was dead. That incredibly stupid pharmaceutical drug his company created ended his life, and he was only 45 years old at that. It was just plain impossible to wrap my brain around the fact that I'd never get to see him again, never get to talk to him or have dinner with him, or look over at the stands or bleachers during sports games and see him cheering me on with that proud smile on his face. Of course, he hadn't gone to my last game, but still, no way he deserved this. No way I deserved this. No way our whole freaking family deserved this. Mom was a total wreck, too. We hardly said anything to each other as she spent most of her time in her and Dad's bedroom. I only saw her when we tried to eat a meal together, but those moments were few and far between, and we hardly wound up eating or saying much of anything anyway. One time we just plain hugged each other on the living room couch, not moving for hours. Needless to say, I didn't go to school for those first few days after Dad's death. I wasn't even sure if Mom called the school to let them know why, though I assumed she did. I didn't answer any of Dana's texts or calls either. Just saw there was an endless barrage of them on my phone, but didn't even bother to read them. Eventually, on the third day or so, I honestly somewhat lost track of the time. The doorbell rang. I was lying on the living room couch again, had been all day, but didn't get up. A moment later, the doorbell rang again, but I still didn't budge. Then came a loud knocking on the front door. "Open up, Drake Michael Hamilton!" Dana's voice emanated from outside. "I know you're in there, you big stinky silly puss!" Oh boy, back to the corny, old-school phrases again. Still, I couldn't wrench myself from my spot. Not that I actually tried. "Drake, if you or your mom don't open this door right this very second, I'm bringing it down with something. I'll find something huge and thick and I'll break it right down. Don't you think I won't?" I inwardly groaned but still didn't budge. "Just go away, Dana. Leave me in peace, or, well, hell, really." "Fine. I'm giving you to the count of 3, then this door's coming down, all right?" I didn't respond. 1, 2... God, just go away, Dana. Seriously, I don't want to talk to you or anyone right now. 3! I scrunched my eyes shut, ready for the inevitable loud bang. Knowing Dana, she absolutely would bust the freaking door down. Instead, a light creak sounded. Oh, it's open. All right. I noticed Mom had gone outside a couple of times over the last couple days, probably just to get some fresh air, walk around the neighborhood. Anything to try and get her mind off Dad's death, even if only for a few minutes. But clearly she'd forgotten to lock the door when she last came back. Even though it meant the house hadn't been safe since she'd been out last, I couldn't blame her. Neither of our minds were exactly operating at full capacity at the moment. Dana plodded down the hallway, stopped at the threshold of the living room, and took in my fetal position on the couch. Her expression was all hard lines and edges, though they all quickly blurred into non-existence. "Oh, Drake, I'm so sorry. I heard, on the news, and well, everyone at school knows. I'm so sorry." I managed a weak nod, shifting my body ever so slightly. "Thanks, Dana." I had to admit, despite my initial reaction to her arrival, I was already feeling a bit better now that she was in the room. Maybe that was the power of girls or something, or probably more realistically, this girl. "I just wanted to come by and tell you that, and to ask if there's anything I can do to help. Anything at all?" I slowly shook my head. I'm just going to need some time to process this, I think. Though I'd known as soon as Dad died that no amount of time would ever fully heal this unbearable pain. I mean, I was only 12 years old and my dad was gone. Forever. I was pretty sure that was something you never really got over. A void that can never truly be filled for as long as you live. "I totally understand, Drakey." Drakey? That was a new one. She gently rubbed one of her elbows. "Well, there's also something else I'd like to tell you. Something I'm also sorry about." "Oh? What was this about?" It took a lot of energy, but I managed to pull myself into a seated position. "What's up?" Her gaze flicked all over the room, then settled back on me. Well, I was actually never touched, by an extraterrestrial." "Oh, right. I figured that at one point, of course, but hadn't thought about it too much, what with being so consumed with Dad's death and all." "Yeah," I said. "I know." She straightened her posture, her eyes bugging a bit wide. "Really? How could you possibly know that?" I swished a hand through the air. "It's a long story. It doesn't matter now, though, so don't worry about it." "Of course it matters. I made you feel really bad, really stupid and jealous and angry. I know I did. And you didn't deserve that. Not at all. So I'm really, really sorry, Drakey. And I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." For the first time in a few days, I let a small smile crook my lips, which actually felt kind of good. "Of course I forgive you, Dana. I'm sure you didn't mean any harm by it." Curiosity gripped me a bit then, another thing I hadn't felt in the past few days. It also felt kind of nice. But why did you lie about that? She bit her bottom lip and started rubbing her elbow again. Well, because I wanted to impress you. Huh? I wasn't expecting that. Impress me? What do you mean? Why? Well, She glanced off into the corner of the room, then back at me. Well, because you're so good at everything. Like, amazing. Like, you're so incredibly smart and athletic, and you have an awesome heart. It's almost like... What looked to be a bit of a wry smile slid onto her face. It's almost like you have superpowers or something. I let out a chuckle. I couldn't help it. But I could say the same thing about you. You're awesome at loads of stuff and have a great heart, too. She glanced down as she shuffled her feet slightly. Aw, thanks. But I guess I was just kind of feeling kind of jealous. You know, like I wasn't as good as you or something. Oh, Dana, that's completely ridiculous. I mean, come on. You have to know That's not all, though. She swallowed hard, took another quick glance at the corner of the room, and then looked back. I also made up that I was touched because... She rubbed her elbow extra hard now, so much I wouldn't have been surprised if a spark flew from it. Because I wanted you to like me. What? Seriously? What kind of insane, mind-altering drug was she smoking these days? Dana, of course I like you. What kind of crazy talk is this? No, she trained her gaze hard on mine, and it seemed to penetrate my very soul or something. I mean, I wanted you to like me. A brief silence wafted through the room as I let that settle deeply into me. Oh, I murmured. Way to go, Drake. Another caveman reaction to Dana or whatever the heck else is going on in your life. The least you can do is say something to the poor girl. But as hard as I grappled for words, I couldn't latch on to any. Sorry, she said. I shouldn't have said anything. I guess I just thought. I mean, I was always grabbing your arm and calling you hun, but, well, you never really seemed to respond or do the same thing back, so, I guess I thought maybe you'd see me differently, you know? Feel differently about me if I was touched, but I guess not. Sorry, Drake. So sorry. She wheeled around and fast-walked toward the door. Bye, Drake, she called back. Feel better real soon. Dana, wait, I cried, but she kept plodding down the hallway. Dana, I cried again, but she was already out the front door, which softly thudded shut behind her. Oh, Dana. Chapter 21. Before I could fully process what just happened, Mom stepped into the room. She looked like a full-on ghost, her face morbidly pale and her eyes glaring red from the lack of sleep, with huge bags hanging under them. The only normal thing about her was her holding her white coffee mug, steam lightly drifting from it. I hadn't seen her drink or brew any of the stuff since Dad's death, so I guess that was a somewhat good sign. Everything all right, honey? She asked. Yeah, everything's fine. Well, as good as they were going to get, considering the circumstances. Another thick current of pain rippled through me at the thought of Dad, making me want to curl up into a fetal position again, but I managed to stop myself. That was just Dana. She came by to give me, us her condolences. Oh, well, that was nice of her. Yeah, it was. Then something struck me. Something that had occurred to me a while ago, but I hadn't bothered to ask Mom yet. Mom, I thought you and Dad said FarmCore Labs perfected that brain-enhancing or whatever drug. So how could he have? If possible. Mom's eyes grew even redder and blearier, and she took a sip of her coffee with an extra shaky hand. Honestly, honey, I don't think they actually did perfect it. Yeah, no back crud, Mom. Yeah, but how could they not have? I mean, how could they have given it to their employees if it hadn't been totally perfected? Or did they think it was perfected, but it really hadn't been? She heaved a deep sigh, then took another sip of coffee. Well, honey, I'm sure FarmCore Labs made at least some improvements. They're always trying to improve their drugs, after all. Especially that one, since it's such a potentially game-changing one and has always given them trouble. They just aren't very good at it? She let out a weak chuckle, a rueful smile clinging to her face. Well, That's certainly one way of putting it, honey. But the other fact of the matter is, well, FarmCore Labs is always basically forcing its employees to take the latest version of that particular drug, and it threatens to fire them if they don't. I think the idea is the company wants its employees to be more productive at work, despite how potentially dangerous the drug is. I let that sink in me. Whoa, that's just plain sick and illegal. I know, honey, and sure, the deadly, highly contagious version that broke out of the laboratory was a total accident. That thing wasn't supposed to ever see the light of day, period. But when it comes to many of the drug's other versions, if not most of them, like I said, the company has always basically forced its employees to take them. Jeez. But how could they possibly do such a thing? I mean, it's so incredibly dangerous and so wrong. Now it was Mom's turn to glance into a corner of the room. So long I thought she'd completely spaced out, but then she looked back at me. Well, unfortunately, as you basically just said, honey, FarmCore Labs isn't exactly the most ethical company in the world. For example, this isn't even the first time an employee has passed away from taking one of their crazy, highly advanced drugs. Quite a few have over the many years, in fact, and even more have been hospitalized. Even some released with permanent health conditions, making it tough for them to work or live their lives how they used to. But the company has always kept it under wraps. Obviously, they couldn't do that with the super dangerous one that broke out recently. But the bottom line is they just plain don't care about their employees' well-being, or anybody's, really. What do they care about then? Making money, making progress, changing the world for the so-called greater good and all that. I mean, don't get me wrong, those last two goals are obviously admirable, but not at the expense of their employees' lives, of course, or any human beings for that matter. She threw back her head and gazed up at the ceiling. Ugh, I'm just so sick of it. I couldn't argue with her there. I still don't quite get it, though. I mean, how can FarmCore Labs make so much money and progress if its employees are constantly dying or getting sick from all the drugs they're being forced to take? And why would anyone want to stay in a company where that's even happening in the first place? Why don't people just quit and get a new job somewhere else? She took an especially long sip of coffee, then pursed her lips. Good questions, honey. And well, the thing is, FarmCore Labs does the best it can to sabotage those who try to quit. Like it claims they were terrible employees and were fired rather than quit, which makes it super tough for them to get hired anywhere else, which obviously makes it super tough for them to make a living. Right, that definitely explained why Dad had still been with the company all these years. FarmCore Labs is such a huge, powerful company, it's extremely hard for anybody to fight against its word. It pretty much always gets its way. Oh, besides, whenever an employee dies or gets sick, FarmCore Labs just finds another one to take their place. It's so big there are always countless people eager to fill the voids, only to unknowingly get trapped once they're hired. Right, that was what FarmCore Labs really was. An enormous, horrific trap for highly intelligent and passionate people like Dad who just wanted to make a positive difference in the world. Oh, Dad. I clutched my stomach again as what felt like another toxic cloud festered inside it. Ugh, that awful piece of bat crud company. They'd pay for all this. I couldn't help but notice Mom's hand that was clutching her mug was extra white and shaking a bit, a little coffee splashing out over the rim. And to make matters worse, she said, I'm pretty sure of something else, too. What's that? Like I could take any more utterly awful information right now. Your father was always very passionate about his work, obviously. But did you notice he seemed to be getting more and more excited about it in recent years? Like, freakishly excited? Especially this past week, ever since the outbreak occurred. Oh yeah, definitely. How could I not have noticed? Well, I think that also has to do with the drug. I think Mr. Spencer, he's the CEO of FarmCore Labs, has been adding some kind of ingredient to later versions of the brain-enhancing drug, an ingredient that makes the company's employees even more excited about their work, and the company so that they're eager to work even more. Oh, that explained why Dad was working entire nights in addition to entire days. as well as why he missed one of the biggest basketball games of my entire life when he'd never missed a single one before. And then, of course, there was the classic example of him sticking his hand in the middle of the burner flame, that ecstatic, creepy as heck smile fanning his face. Mom, Mr. Spencer, he's a monster, an absolute monster. He's killing and hurting people and forcing them to work and ruining their and their family's quality of life. I didn't even bother to mention the whole deadly public outbreak thing he was responsible for, too, even if it was an accident. I know, sweetie. I know. Mom's gaze dropped to the floor. We have to do something then. We can't just let him continue to get away with this utter bat crud. We can't just let Farm Corps continue to hurt and destroy people's lives. She looked up at me, her face as craggy and old-looking as I'd ever seen it, like she'd aged 20 years in the past few minutes. There's nothing we can do, honey. I wish there was. There's no way we could ever prove what Farm Corps Labs is really up to. It's just impossible. I thought about that, let it swirl around in my brain. I had to admit the situation did look pretty bleak, but how could we possibly ignore all the horrible things Farm Corps Labs was doing? Anyway, she said, I'm going to take another nap. See you later at dinner, honey, hopefully. She gave a sheepish smile and slunk from the room. The more I thought about it, the more I wasn't going to accept defeat. I wasn't just going to sit here and mope around and grieve over Dad's death. No, I was going to avenge his death, and all the other people who'd either also lost their lives or had them horribly diminished because of Mr. Spencer and his stupid company's evil, selfish ways. Chapter 22. That night I called Dana and told her everything I'd learned about Mr. Spencer and Farm Corps Labs from Mom. I just couldn't help it. I had to tell somebody. I also mentioned my new plan to take them both down. Wow, she murmured when I finished. That's insane and diabolical. Thanks. You think it'll work? Yeah, sure. At least I definitely think it has a chance. Especially with me there as your, sidekick. Huh? Wait, what? Oh, you know I'm coming along. There's absolutely no way I'm not, no matter what you say. I could hear her smiling through her phone and couldn't help but remember how the last time she said that, she'd placed her gloved hand on my arm, sending a tingling sensation pulsing through me, even though our bare skin didn't touch. Yeah, there was something about Dana, all right, but now wasn't the time to bring it up. I had a mission to do, an incredibly important one. But how? I'll just tell Mr. Spencer I'm interested too, as your, close friend. I let that roll around in my head a bit. Okay, I guess that could work. Of course it will. I haven't a doubt in my mind. All right, we'll do it tonight then. As soon as it strikes midnight, same deal as before. I'm there. Okay, cool. And thanks so much for your help, Dana. I really don't know what I'd do without you. Of course, Drakey, any time. And then she hung up. As I sat there in bed, trying to mentally prepare myself for tonight's mission, I couldn't help but think how truly special Dana was, and the fact that no matter how things were between us, however the last conversation went, I could always just call her up and talk to her, about anything, and she was always willing to help no matter what. I heaved a long, deep sigh as I glanced up at the ceiling, imagining a fleet of invisible extraterrestrial saucers hovering in the sky above the house, even though I now knew they weren't really there, that they never were. Yeah, she was something else, all right, and I definitely had to do something about the situation with her. But right now, I had a job to do. I had to focus on taking down Mr. Spencer and his evil company for good, not just for Dad, Mom, and me, but every employee and their families who had ever worked there or still were. Chapter 23. This time, when I walked my bike out of the garage's side door at midnight, Dana was already waiting there for me, grinning fiendishly at me while sitting on her bike and making revving motions with the handlebars again, as if her bike were a motorcycle. I rolled my eyes. Here we go again, I muttered playfully. You know you like it, she said as I got on my bike, and we silently headed out into the night, toward the Farm Corps Labs building where Dad had worked. We made it there in record time, thankfully not having any close calls with any cars or trucks like before, and pulled our bikes to a stop toward the back of the well-lit parking lot. Without a word, we set our cell phones to record audio, put them back in our pockets, and went up to the hulking 30-floor skyscraper made mostly of glass and concrete. Like the last time we were here, bright light gleamed from practically every window, people constantly shifting and moving around inside. We pushed past the glass double doors and headed toward the enormous gold-gilded desk along the far lobby wall, our sneakers making light clacks on the black marble floor as we went. I couldn't help but bask in the ritzy atmosphere. The lobby was 5 stories tall with gigantic, sparkly chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. I could also make out the gold railings of open, glass-bordered hallways encircling the room along the 4 higher floors. It was really an incredible place to work. Well, aesthetically, that is. Still, maybe Dana and I should have worn nicer clothes instead of our sneakers and somewhat worn t-shirts and shorts. Her sporting Superwoman, mine Iron Man, but it was too late now. The receptionist at the desk seemed to think the same thing as she squinted and pursed her lips as she took us in. She was pretty young, probably early 20s, with a set of blonde pigtails and bright pink lipstick. A gold name tag on our dark blue suit read, Mrs. Carlotta. Hello there, children. May I help you? Yes, I said. We would like to see Mr. Spencer as soon as possible, please. If that's possible. I figured there was a good chance it was, since I looked online earlier and saw Mr. Spencer mostly worked out of this FarmCore Labs location. Pretty lucky, really, considering the loads of locations the company had all over the world, but this happened to be the main one. Mrs. Carlotta raised an eyebrow at us. Do you have an appointment? Well, no. Bat crud. I probably should have called beforehand and tried to set one up. But my dad was David Hamilton. It was hard to even push that out, my throat automatically trying to close around the words, but I somehow managed. Mrs. Carlotta's eyes dimmed a few shades, her skin taking on a splotchy hue that made her lipstick look neon bright. Oh, I see. I'm terribly sorry about what happened to your father, honey. Such a terrible tragedy. All of us here at FarmCore Labs are incredibly sad. Oh, thanks. The familiar painful pang hit my chest again, but I fought through it. But yeah, if possible, we'd really like to talk to Mr. Spencer as soon as we can. She nodded. He's a very busy man, of course, but I'll see what I can do. She picked up a black phone from behind the desk, took a couple of steps away, and spoke in a tone just low enough I couldn't make out her words. Then she hung up. Good news. He happens to be free at the moment and would like the 2 of you to head up to his office. Please use the elevator on the far right. It'll take you right there. Yes. My chest felt like it swelled 3 times its size, adrenaline churning through me as though being whipped into butter. Objective 1 complete. Great. Thanks so much, Mrs. Carlotta. We really appreciate it. Yeah, Dana said. Thanks so much. Mrs. Carlotta smiled, her eyes as sparkly as the chandeliers hanging above us. Certainly, children. Glad I could help. Dana and I quickly headed over to the far right elevator along a bank of them spanning the entire left wall of the lobby, and I pushed the call button. The elevator opened a split second later, and we went inside. There was only one button in the interior, so I pushed it. Must have been Mr. Spencer's private elevator, then, the one that only went to his office and back. My heart gave an especially hard pang. Yikes. This was happening. This was really happening. Dana and I were getting closer to pulling off our incredibly important and risky plan, but there was still a long way to go. A short moment later, the elevator dinged and slid open. We stepped out and silently headed along a narrow, white marble floor hallway, the walls on both sides sporting countless pictures and advertisements of FarmCore Labs drugs, but I hardly paid them any attention. I couldn't have cared less about them anymore. Dana and I had a mission to accomplish. We finally made it to the cherrywood door at the far end, which slid open automatically as we approached. Fancy, fancy. Though now it felt like I had 2 hearts trying to outpound each other in my chest, making my whole body continually shudder. Dana and I exchanged a quick glance, and then I took a deep breath and crossed the threshold. She followed closely behind. Here goes. Chapter 24. I stepped into the largest, grandest office I'd ever seen. The immediate area contained a sleek turquoise leather couch and chairs surrounding an all-glass coffee table. Built into the wall to the right of that was an electric fireplace, fake flames dancing across its screen livelier and more vibrantly than normal ones would. To the left of the seating area was a little kitchenette of sorts, and beyond all of that was a short marble staircase, just a few steps that led up to another enormous area. At the end of that sat a massive cherry wood desk in front of the office's all-glass wall, the black web of night, complete with stars and a low-hanging moon framing it. Last but not least, Mr. Spencer himself sat at the desk facing us. "Hello there, children," he called down to us. "Please come on up. Come on up." Dana and I didn't respond. We just headed past the seating area, up the stairs, and up to Mr. Spencer's desk. "Please, take a seat." He gestured towards two gigantic black leather armchairs in front of the desk. "Thank you," I said as I sat in one, Dana in the other. "You're very welcome." Wow. Now that I was this close, I had to admit Mr. Spencer looked incredibly young in his light blue suit and tie, sporting short, crew-cut brown hair and a boyish freckled face. In fact, he appeared no older than the receptionist down in the lobby, but there is no way that could have been true. I read online he started FarmCore Labs over 30 years ago, so geez, no clue how he managed to look so young. Although now that I thought about it, I wouldn't have been surprised if it had to do with some kind of drug his company manufactured that made you look much younger. Maybe even a drug only he was allowed to take, considering I didn't know a single person in my life who looked that young for their age. "Thank you so much for coming to meet me this lovely evening, or perhaps I should say night." As he spoke, I noticed a huge iguana sat on his lap, unmoving, totally docile. Mr. Spencer idly stroked it, almost like a cat. Kind of weird, but the lizard seemed content. "I really do very much appreciate your visit. However, before you explain the reason for it, let me say, first and foremost, I am terribly sorry for the loss of your father, Drake." He bore his light blue-eyed gaze to match his suit into mine, and it took all my effort to hold back a shiver. Despite how young and innocent he appeared, I knew what he really was. A bully. No, a monster who didn't care for the well-being of his employees or anyone, really. His very appearance was even somewhat proof of that. "It was a terrible tragedy," he said, "and my heart, and all our hearts here at FarmCore Labs, go out to you and your family, and everyone else unfairly suffering due to these extremely difficult times." Yeah, and it was all your fault, I wanted to shout, but held back. After all, the outbreak probably was just a terrible accident, and I had to stick to Dana's and my plan. So I said, "Thank you. I really appreciate that, Mr. Spencer." "You're very welcome, young man. Now why are you and this fine young lady here?" He winked at Dana, and what felt like a miniature version of his iguana slithered along my spine. There was absolutely nothing charismatic about that wink, or this man for that matter. "Well," I said, "as completely devastated and heartbroken as I and my family are over my dad's death," I swallowed a lump forming in my throat. "My friend Dana and I were wondering if we could help out with your company. You know, do some work for it in any way possible." "Oh, really?" He cocked his head slightly at me, still idly stroking his iguana. Bat crud. I was really going to have to sell this, wasn't I? I nodded vigorously, trying to seem as excited as possible. "Yeah, we know we're just kids, but, well, we're both, like, enormous fans of FarmCore Labs and all the amazing drugs you guys have created, and continue to create. I mean, ever since I can remember, my dad ranted and raved about how incredible they all are, and he's been told both me and Dana about practically all of them, including the, one that improves the human brain by a ton. Dad actually never did any of that, but I felt this would be the most convincing story for Dana's and my mission, although I did research a ton of the drugs tonight before midnight, just in case Mr. Spencer tried to quiz me on them. Mr. Spencer's eyebrows curved into squiggles, a layer of frost settling in his eyes. Uh-oh. Oh, really? He wasn't supposed to do that. Disclosure of any info regarding any drugs not yet available to the public is strictly against company policy. He could have been fired for that. In fact, if he were still working here today, I would be forced to do so, effective immediately. Uh-oh. I gulped hard, my heart rate spiking. Calm down, Drake, calm down. Well, I said, I and Dana didn't know that, but anyway, both of us are incredibly inspired by FarmCore Labs and all the amazing things it does. Your company improves the world in so many wonderful ways, so, well, like I said, we love to help out however we can, and it'd be super easy, too. I mean, if we took that awesome brain-enhancing drug, then we could go to school and be normal kids and still be able to help out here at night. I mean, it's a win-win, right? Mr. Spencer's eyebrows straightened out, the layer of frost melting from his eyes. Are you children absolutely sure about this? After all, you've learned so much confidential information about FarmCore Labs and its drugs, and you are also aware some of the drugs aren't quite finished yet and have certain harmful side effects, and that FarmCore Labs essentially requires its employees to take such drugs from time to time. Now, I couldn't keep from gulping a gigantic wad of saliva. Come on, Drake. Here's the bait we've been looking for. Take it. Yes, we're definitely aware of that, sir. We know your drugs could badly hurt or even kill us like they've done to many of your employees. But honestly, we really don't care. I mean, improving all of mankind by a megaton from now on into the future? What could possibly be a better way for someone to spend their life? Even if the drugs do wind up doing something horrible to Dana and me, we can die happy knowing we've done so much to help mankind, just like my dad did. So it's more than worth the risk to us, right, Dana? Oh yes, definitely. Besides, maybe the drugs won't even harm us at all and will only greatly improve our abilities. Awesome. Nice addition, Dana. Mr. Spencer was silent a moment, apparently thinking that all over as he let his gaze rove gently back and forth between us. Finally, he nodded. I couldn't have said it better myself. You two are clearly FarmCore Labs material. All right, then. You're both hired, effective immediately. Awesome. I gave a fist pump to sell my excitement. Fantastic, Dana said. We were both so excited, elated even. Elated, eh? Dana certainly knew her way around big words when she knew they'd help us out. And even better, we just got our much-needed evidence. Unknowingly, Mr. Spencer had just given us the concrete evidence we needed to shut him and his horrific company down for good, as our cell phones had just recorded him confirming his company's evil ways. Now all we needed to do was get the proof to the police. Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Mr. Spencer pushed a button on a wooden panel on his desk. Before we get started with anything official, however, I'd like to do something a little special for the two of you as FarmCore Labs' newest employees. Do your parents know you're here, by the way? I don't want to keep them waiting if they're expecting you. I shot Dana a quick glance. No, we snuck out. We didn't want to alert them. Heck, Dana said. We didn't even tell them we wanted to work here in the first place, since we weren't sure how they'd react. We figured if we officially got the gig, it might help tip the scales in our favor if it turned out they weren't very big fans of the idea. Yes, even more quick thinking from Dana. Good thing I brought her along. Then again, when wasn't it? Mr. Spencer nodded. Very wise of you, as I've already come to expect. The sound of the office door sliding open came from the lower end of the office, and a massive, heavily muscled man climbed up a short staircase into our part of the room. He was wearing an all-black uniform with the phrase "security" on it, and stopped just behind Dana and me, deep grooves etched in his weathered face. Drake and Dana, Mr. Spencer said. This is Mr. Morgenstern, head of security here at the Pacific Valley FarmCore Labs location. Hello, Mr. Morgenstern, Dana and I said at the same time. He merely nodded, his gaze staring off into the blackness of night beyond the glass office wall. Mr. Morgenstern, Mr. Spencer said, please give these two lovely young children a full tour of the facilities, starting with the basement and working your way all the way up to the roof. They are remarkably passionate and intelligent and have requested to work here, so I have graciously granted them the opportunity to do so. Mr. Morgenstern nodded again and began heading back down the short staircase. "Go on," Mr. Spencer said. "Follow him. He isn't much with words, but you'll get used to him soon enough. He's like an enormous, silent cat, minus the purring and the temptation to pet him." He let out a light chuckle. I cracked a smile despite myself. "Thank you, Mr. Spencer." "Thanks so much, Mr. Spencer," Dana said, and we followed Mr. Morgenstern as he lumbered across the office's lower level, back out into the narrow hallway and into the elevator at the far end. Well, I had to admit, this tour was the absolute last thing I wanted, but hopefully that was all Mr. Spencer had in store for us tonight. Then Dana and I could show our hard-earned evidence to the police and complete our mission. I desperately clung to that hope. Chapter 25. When Mr. Morgenstern, Dana, and I reached the lobby, Mr. Morgenstern headed to the elevator on the far left of the long elevator bank and waited for us to follow him inside. There was only one button, just like in the other one, and he pressed it. Just as the door was sliding shut, I couldn't help but notice Mrs. Carlotta standing behind the reception desk, her bleary-eyed gaze trained on Dana and me. Or maybe that last part was my imagination. I mean, why would her eyes look like that? The elevator jolted into action, heading down a little ways before opening, revealing nothing but pitch blackness. That was kind of weird. Then again, it was the basement. This elevator must have only gone to the basement and back, kind of like Mr. Spencer's personal elevator. Mr. Morgenstern, still totally silent, stepped out of the elevator and flicked a switch on the wall. A line of small bulbs hanging from chains along the ceiling flickered on, shedding dim, meager light on a short hallway. The hallway's ceilings and walls were comprised of weathered gray bricks, dust and errant cobwebs clinging to random parts of them. Yuck. Why did Mr. Spencer want us to see this of all places, even if it was technically part of the building? I mean, it was the polar opposite of the upscale feel the rest of the place had. Well, there must have been something down here that was super important to the company and its so-called success or something. I guess I just have to wait and see, since there was probably no way Mr. Morgenstern was actually going to mention anything. Speaking of which, he started ambling down the corridor, so Dana and I followed. Only after a few strides, he turned into a small room with the same gray brick walls and ceiling. He nodded toward the far wall like he wanted us to head over there, so we did, even though there didn't appear to actually be anything there. Well, except, as I got closer to the wall, I could make out what appeared to be a series of dark red smears along it, and of various sizes, too, and also a bit of the floor and even a little on the ceiling. The hair on the back of my neck prickled and stood on end as I continued to study the unnerving stains. No, it couldn't be dried blood, could it? I whipped my head around, Dana doing the same beside me. Mr. Morgenstern's gigantic figure filled the whole doorway, effectively trapping us in there. My breath hitched in my throat, every square inch of skin on my body rippling into goose flesh. He reached into his pocket with a beefy hand and pulled out a small handgun. "Sorry, kids," he said in a gruff voice as he aimed the black pistol at Dana. Chapter 26. Everything slowed down in that moment, like God or life or whatever just hit the pause button. I even noticed how the light of the single bulb of the room winked off Mr. Morgenstern's clean-looking handgun, as though emphasizing the utter horror about to unfold. And then it all hit me. Mr. Spencer hadn't intended to let Dana and me work here at all. He just humored us. He let us think he'd hire us when in reality, he'd been planning to have us picked off, perhaps even all along. After all, we knew way too much. Even if he correctly suspected we were really here to try to obtain evidence to show the police. Plus, he found out our parents didn't know we were here too, so he figured they'd never know he'd had us killed. Either way, we were dead meat. "No!" I screamed as I dove toward Dana. I crashed into her, bringing her to the ground as a deafening gunshot rang out, echoing in the small room and practically shattering my ears. Pain stabbed my arms and legs where they bit into the hard, rough ground, but I barely noticed. The bullet struck the brick wall above us, a couple of sparks raining down in front of me. Mr. Morgenstern repositioned the pistol. this time directly at my head since I was now blocking his view of Dana. I shut my eyes as another deafening gunshot rang out. Chapter 27. It might sound like the silliest thing you've ever heard in your life, but I willed for Mr. Morgenstern's bullet not to strike me with every ounce of energy I had, like every single last microscopic fiber of my being or soul or whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, the bullet had to hit me. I mean, it was practically a point-blank shot, and Mr. Morgenstern had just fired it. I had to be dead now, right? There was no way I couldn't possibly be alive, still breathing, still thinking, chest heaving like crazy, heart on total overdrive. Huh? Wait a minute. I opened my eyes. What in the... There was the bullet right in front of my eyes, just hovering there mere inches away. But how? How in the rampant flaming gates of heck was that possible? Wait, my mind. Still focusing all my energy hardcore on the bullet, I tried to redirect it upward a few inches. It did as I commanded, though slowly, and when it was safely above my head, I released it. The bullet smashed into the brick wall above Dana and me, like the other one had, a couple more sparks raining down on us. Holy mother of flaming bat crud. I did it. I just dodged a bullet with my mind. Or maybe more accurately, I just made a bullet dodge me. Mr. Morgenstern looked just as utterly bewildered as I was, his already wide jaw stretched even wider, eyes pushing out the limits of their sockets' boundaries. Even the tiny bit of black fuzz on his chin looked thicker than before. Then he closed his mouth and his eyes shrank back into their normal size as he pointed the gun at my head again. Another deafening gunshot rang out, and once again I focused on the bullet, trying to make it dodge me with every ounce of willpower I had. But this time, it was way tougher. The bullet kept coming closer, slowly but surely, and I could feel another kind of energy, another kind of force, coming from Mr. Morgenstern. Yes, I was trying to telepathically slow down the bullet and throw it off course, but he was telepathically trying to speed it up and keep it heading straight toward my head, and he was winning. The bullet continued to move closer and closer, quicker and quicker. Mother of all bat crud, I couldn't fight his mind, and I was sure as heck couldn't simply move out of the way. I was using way too much of my energy on trying to stop the bullet from ending my life. And once I lost all my energy, the bullet would regain its full speed and careen right through my forehead. Oh God, this is it. This is how it's going to end. And then Dana's next. And then something else hit me. Of course, I hadn't a clue how I could manipulate bullets with my brain, but it was obvious enough why Mr. Morgenstern could. He was an employee of FarmCore Labs after all, and just like all the other employees, he'd been forced to take some of the company's drugs at different phases of their development, including the brain-enhancing one, which meant he was trapped, horribly, horribly trapped, just like Dad had been, and just like all the other FarmCore Labs employees and, in a way, their families. Wait, Mr. Morgenstern, I barely managed to push out. It was more like a weak hiss than a shout, but I continued. Stop! I have proof of Mr. Spencer's and therefore FarmCore Labs' evil and corruption. Please, I can show it to the police and this can all be over. You and everyone else at FarmCore Labs can finally be free, I swear. The bullet kept coming toward me, faster and faster. I was losing control quick, running out of mental strength as Mr. Morgenstern seemed to be gaining more, or at least increasing his focus. Either way, I had only a few seconds before I'd lose all my mental strength and the bullet would finally kill me. Please, I'm telling the truth. Yeah, right, kid. No, really, I swear. I have the evidence of this place's corruption on my phone. I can show you right now. You have to believe me. Nice try, kid. No, seriously. Both Dana and I recorded a conversation with Mr. Spencer in his office that reveals how evil and corrupt he and his company are. Before you arrived, like I said, it's on our phones. That's why we even came here in the first place. Please let me show you, Mr. Morgenstern. Please just give me one teeny tiny chance. The bullet was mere inches from my forehead now. I could feel the last of my mental energy slipping away, draining right from my brain, when the bullet clattered to the ground. Mr. Morgenstern had obviously forced it down. All right, show me. You have 3 seconds to play the evidence, kid." My hands had never shaken so much as I yanked my phone out of my pocket and played the recording from a couple minutes earlier. As soon as I played the part where Mr. Spencer admitted his company's corruption, Mr. Morgenstern dropped his pistol with a much louder clatter than the bullet, rushed up to Dana and me, and enveloped us in a massive hug suitable for a woolly mammoth. "I love you guys," he cried as he practically smushed us all together. "I love you guys so much. You have no idea." He pulled away, tears streaming down his blocky, grizzled face. "Go on. Send the recording to the police. You can do it now. There's cell service down here." So I did. Then I called the authorities and explained everything that just happened at this Farm Corps Labs location, Dana and Mr. Morgenstern chiming in at random points. When we finished, the police said to sit tight, as they'd be there any minute. "Come on," Mr. Morgenstern said. "Let's head upstairs. There's nothing Mr. Spencer can do to us now, and there's no reason to hang out in this dreary place." He didn't have to ask Dana and me twice. We followed him again back out into the grimy hallway, into the elevator, and back up to the lobby. Mrs. Carlotta cocked her head at us when we emerged from the elevator. "Is everything all right, Mr. Morgenstern?" Her eyes were crisp and a little wider than usual. "It's all over, Mrs. Carlotta," he said as we continued to follow him toward the building's front doors. "You're free. We're all free." And then he did what I can only describe as frolicking out the doors, loudly singing what sounded like a Broadway song I'd never heard before. The tune echoed through the entire lobby, becoming one with all the gold and marble and glass. "Weird guy," I said. "He's actually pretty good, though," Dana said. "Yeah, true." As we went through the front doors, watching him continue to frolic around outside, I couldn't help but wonder if he'd ever actually performed in a Broadway play before. No sooner than that thought occurred to me, though, than a swarm of police cars invaded the well-lit parking lot. "He's on the top floor!" Mr. Morgenstern belted out in a dramatic sing-song voice as the cops climbed out of their cars. "Last elevator on the far right!" As a squad of policemen entered the building, Dana and I called our parents and told them everything that had happened. In what felt like less than a minute later, each arrived in their own cars. Mom still wearing her pink pajamas, her hair all frizzy and out of control. As soon as she climbed out of her car, she rushed over and enveloped me in an enormous, bone-crunching hug. "I'm so glad you're okay." She stepped away from me, her eyes all red and watery. "I'm so proud of you, both you and Dana." "Us too," Mr. Haversall, Dana's dad, said from beside Dana and her mom. As usual, he wore a gray turtleneck and corduroy pants on his especially slim figure. Not sure how he'd managed to change into them so fast unless he literally slept in them as well. Mrs. Haverstall, on the other hand, was nearly half his height and wearing a silk maroon robe, though somehow her long black hair looked perfect. "And I know your father would be proud of you guys too," Mom said to me. For the first time since he passed away, my body swelled with pride and warmth at the thought of Dad. Hopefully it would every time I thought of him from now on. Yeah, I think so too. There's just one thing I don't get, though. When Mr. Morgenstern shot at me with his gun. "Yeah, sorry about that, kid," he said. I didn't even realize his hulking figure had been standing just a few feet away, eavesdropping on our conversation. That's okay. Anyway, when he shot at me for some reason, I was able to hold off his bullets for a bit with my mind. I wasn't able to for very long, though, especially when he started using his own mind to try and force the bullets to kill me. But, "Yeah, sorry about that, kid," he said again. I pressed on. "But still, how was I able to do that?" "Oh," Mom said. "Well, honey, that's because many years ago, when you were just a baby, Farm Corps Labs let all its employees share some of its latest drug versions with their children. This was before it started forcing its employees to take the drugs and before it was clear how dangerous they could be. So, one time your father and I snuck a pill of the most current brain-enhancing drug at the time into your food. You know, with the idea that you'd be smarter and more athletic, and as a result you have a better life and all that kind of stuff." "Ah," I said. "So that was why I'd always been so good at sports, and why I'd always been such a good student. And it also explains how I survived that crazy ice cream semi-truck incident, Any normal kid would have been severely hurt, if not killed, if they'd crashed into that hulking thing with their bike, and they certainly wouldn't have been able to pierce the truck's solid steel with their arm. It also explained why I wasn't able to ultimately fend off Mr. Morgenstern's second bullet. He probably had taken one of the latest brain-enhancing drug versions, which was much stronger than the one I'd ingested as a baby. But wait, those couple of times I tried to make my clock levitate to see if I'd been touched by an alien during the night, how come I hadn't been able to do that, but I could mentally stave off bullets from a gun? But as soon as I thought it, I realized the reason must have been the sheer adrenaline and desperation I had due to my life being in jeopardy. The situation must have forced my brain into overdrive or something in that moment. But all this also meant, so it wasn't really me. This whole time, for my whole life, I was so good at so many things, only because of some stupid drug I'd been unknowingly given as a baby. Like it was never actually me. As I said that, a terrible empty feeling wafted through me, making my whole body feel like it had been dumped and stranded on Mars. I mean, it was like my whole identity had just been upended, totally destroyed in one single second. Mom's eyes grew glassy again as her shoulders slouched slightly. Well, yes, to a degree. But you're also a good kid, honey. A really good kid with an enormous heart. And not only are those the best traits anyone could have, they're completely natural, too. She wrapped an arm around both my shoulders and gave a light squeeze. I agree, Dana said. You are a really good kid, with an enormous heart. She shot me the warmest smile she'd ever shot me before, and the empty feeling disintegrated as quickly as it came, making me feel like me again. But before I could say anything or smile back at her, the double front doors of the skyscraper slid open, and Mr. Spencer, handcuffed and flanked by a group of policemen, exited. He didn't even glance in our direction, just kept his head down as the cops led him to the closest police car and prodded him in the back. He put up a heck of a fight, one of the cops who'd been flanking him told us. A surprisingly good one. Probably hopped up on some kind of crazy drug or a couple of them or something, but we got him all right. He winked at Dana and me as he walked by and got into his own car. That's great to hear, Mom said. Awesome, Dana said. Good riddance, I muttered, as the police car with Mr. Spencer in the back peeled out of the parking lot and vanished into the night down Route 86. The rest of the police cars then followed suit, leaving the parking lot filled with only a swarm of employees who had left the building. Most of them were singing and dancing with each other and around their cars, though not as nearly as well as Mr. Morgenstern had. To some tune someone was blaring on their cell phone. Some were drinking from what were clearly beer cans, others straight from wine bottles. Where'd they even get any of that stuff? And so quickly, anyway? Well, Mr. Haversall said, I guess we should all be getting back to our homes now. Yeah, I said. As much fun as the employees are obviously having, I'm pretty freaking beat, both mentally and physically. Yeah, me too, Dana said. Same here, Mr. Morgenstern said, though he didn't make any move to leave. Apparently he was still eavesdropping. Dana let loose a little sigh. I'm still a little wired, though. I might have to have a small cup of hot cocoa or something before bed, to try and settle my nerves a bit. That's not a bad idea, Mr. Haversall said. Yeah, definitely not, I said. I love hot cocoa, Mr. Morgenstern said. Anyway, Dana said, see you guys later. And see you at school tomorrow, Drake. And she and her parents started heading toward their car, but before she could take more than a couple of steps, I grabbed her arm, stopping her. Oh, you know I'm coming along, I said. There's absolutely no way I'm not, no matter what you say. For a cup of hot cocoa. Her whole body went rigid as she slowly craned her neck in my direction, drilling her unblinking gaze into mine, her face totally expressionless. If that's okay with you, of course. Her body eased up a bit as she blinked, a warm smile sliding across her face. Of course it's okay with me, Drakey. I removed my hand from her arm and slid it into one of hers. Cool. Lead the way then, hun.